The phone rested flat on the granite counter, on speaker. My Aunt Valerie stood 3 feet away with her hand frozen inside a velvet-lined jewelry box. The teller on the line cleared her throat. "Ms. Hill, we are calling from Providence Coastal Credit Union regarding an inactive account holding $180,000. Someone matching an authorized signer profile attempted to wire the balance an hour ago, but failed the security protocol. We are required to notify the sole beneficiary. That beneficiary is you." I watched the blood drain from Valerie's face. Her fingers went slack, and a silver brooch dropped onto the hardwood floor with a sharp clatter. She had spent the last 2 hours tearing through that house, packing up decades of memories like she was looting a thrift store. She did not know my grandmother Beatrice had spent her final months building a fortress out of her finances. Before I explain what happened next and how I used my background as a nurse to dismantle my aunt's entire life, please take a second to hit the like and subscribe buttons. Only do it if this story earns your time. Welcome back to Olivia Stories Revenge. Drop your age and where you are listening from in the comments. I always read them. Now, let me take you back to the beginning of that afternoon. The Warwick house smelled like sea salt and lemon wood polish. Beatrice lived there for 40 years. I spent every Sunday of my childhood on her back porch, watching the Rhode Island fog roll in. I became a neonatal intensive care nurse because Beatrice taught me how to sit quietly and monitor the things that matter. Valerie, on the other hand, treated the house like an ATM. She only visited when her credit cards maxed out. The funeral reception ended at 2 o'clock. By 3, Valerie had her SUV backed into the driveway. She walked through the front door carrying 3 empty canvas tote bags. She did not offer me a glass of water. She did not ask how I felt. She marched straight to the dining room and began shoving heavy silver spoons into a bag. They scraped against each other, sharp and metallic. She moved to the mantel, taking the crystal candlesticks and the framed photographs. I stood by the kitchen island, holding a single strand of pearls. Beatrice gave them to me privately on my 16th birthday. Valerie noticed them draped over my fingers. She dropped her bag on the table and crossed the room. Her heels clicked fast against the floorboards. She held out her hand, palm up. "Those belong to the estate Lenora." She kept her voice low, but the edge was unmistakable. "I am the executor now. Hand them over." I look at babies attached to ventilators all day. I know what a genuine crisis looks like, and I know what panic looks like. Valerie was not grieving. She was frantic. Her eyes darted around the room, scanning for the next valuable item. Rather than arguing, I placed the pearls into her outstretched palm. I did not raise my voice. I let the cold pearls slip from my fingers into hers. She smirked, clutching them tight to her chest like a prize. "You always were too soft for your own good," she said. She turned back toward the dining room. That was when my cell phone buzzed in my pocket, a local Providence area code. I answered and pressed the speaker icon, setting the device down on the counter. The teller introduced herself. Then she mentioned the $180,000. Valerie pivoted. The smugness vanished, replaced by a rigid, hollow terror. "Hang that up," Valerie said. Her voice cracked. She took a step toward the counter, reaching for my phone. "That money is part of the estate." I stepped in front of the counter, blocking her path. I looked down at the phone, then back up at Valerie. My pulse held steady. "Cancel the wire," I told the teller. "Freeze the account." The line went dead with a quiet click. The silence in the kitchen settled over us, heavy and suffocating. Valerie stood between me and the hallway archway, blocking the only exit. Her chest heaved beneath her dark silk blouse. The polished veneer she wore for the funeral guests had cracked, revealing the raw, frantic energy underneath. I watched the pulse flutter rapidly at the base of her throat. In the neonatal intensive care unit, when a monitor sounds an alarm, you do not panic. You step back. You check the infant's airway. You check the intravenous lines. You locate the exact physiological source of the failure. Valerie was experiencing a catastrophic system failure right in front of me, and I needed to diagnose the root cause. "What did you do?" she whispered. Her voice carried a ragged edge that bounced off the tile backsplash. "What kind of paperwork did you make her sign?" I kept my hands visible, resting them flat against the cool granite of the kitchen island. I did not make her sign anything, Valerie. The credit union called me. She took a step forward, closing the distance. Her designer heels snapped against the vintage hardwood floor. She had dementia, Lenora. We all saw it happening. Her mind was slipping for months. You took advantage of a sick, vulnerable woman. I stared at her, keeping my facial expression carefully neutral. Beatrice did not have dementia. Her physical joints were failing from decades of severe rheumatoid arthritis. Her knuckles were swollen and stiff, making it difficult to hold a spoon. But her mind remained as sharp as a surgical scalpel. Up until her final week in the assisted living facility, she completed the Sunday crossword puzzle in pen. She tracked the municipal bond market. She remembered the specific names of my nursing supervisors. Valerie knew this reality better than anyone. The dementia claim was a calculated, tactical maneuver. It was the legal foundation my aunt was laying to contest the credit union funds in probate court. If she could paint me as an opportunistic predator, she could reclaim the narrative and seize the assets. The frozen account acted like a medical clamp on a hemorrhaging artery. It stopped the immediate bleed, but the underlying wound remained wide open. Valerie realized she could not access the cash today. She needed to assert dominance over the physical territory instead. She held out her hand. The stolen vintage pearls were already tucked deep inside her coat pocket. "Give me your house key," she demanded. Her chin lifted, mimicking authority. "I am the executor of this estate. I am legally responsible for securing the premises. You have no right to come and go as you please anymore." I looked at her outstretched palm. Beatrice handed me a copy of that brass key the day I received my acceptance letter to the university nursing program. She told me I would always need a quiet, safe place to sleep after a grueling 12-hour night shift. The house in Warwick became my sanctuary, away from the clinical alarms and the harsh fluorescent hospital lighting. Valerie always resented that key. It represented unmonitored access to the matriarch of the family. It meant Valerie could not control the flow of information between her mother and me. I evaluated the immediate threat level. Valerie was unpredictable and backed into a corner. De-escalation required giving her a false sense of victory. I reached into the pocket of my scrub jacket and unclipped the brass key from my metal ring. The metal felt warm from my body heat. I set it gently on the granite counter. It produced a dull, hollow chime against the stone. Valerie snatched it up. Her posture shifted instantly. The acquisition of the physical key fed her desperate need for control. She rolled her shoulders back, attempting to project the aristocratic confidence she preferred to wear in public. Her gaze swept the kitchen counters, searching for anything else she could claim or discard to prove her ownership. Her eyes landed on the wooden dish rack beside the sink. Sitting alone on the drying mat was Beatrice's everyday coffee mug. It was an ugly piece of pottery. The ceramic was a muted, faded green with a chipped rim and a cracked handle. A faded logo for a local hardware store that closed 2 decades ago decorated the side. Beatrice drank dark roast coffee from it every single morning at 6 o'clock. Valerie picked the mug up, holding it by the cracked handle with 2 fingers, like it was a contaminated biohazard. She kept so much garbage, Valerie sneered. Her upper lip curled in disgust. With a quick flick of her wrist, she tossed the mug toward the stainless steel trash can under the sink. It hit the bottom with a heavy thud, landing squarely on top of discarded funeral programs and wilted floral foam from the morning service. She grabbed her heavy canvas tote bags from the dining table. The silver spoons clinked together, producing a muffled, rhythmic sound of theft. She paused in the front hallway archway, turning back to look at me one last time. "Do not try to fight me on this estate, Lenora," she warned. Her voice dropped an octave, attempting to sound menacing. "I call the shots now. David is out of town on business this week, but the moment he gets back, we are sitting down with the estate lawyers. You are going to sign a waiver releasing that credit union account to me." The front door slammed shut. The heavy oak frame shuddered, rattling the glass window panes. I listened to her luxury SUV engine turn over. The tires spun on the gravel drive, tearing out onto the main coastal road. I stood alone in the quiet kitchen. the familiar, comforting scent of lemon wood polish mixed with the lingering artificial floral notes of Valerie's expensive perfume. I processed her parting words, running them through my mind like a diagnostic test. David is out of town on business. My uncle David managed a modest portfolio of suburban strip malls. His idea of a business trip was driving 40 minutes north to Providence for a lunch meeting at a steakhouse. He wore pastel golf shirts and drank expensive scotch on his back patio. He never traveled for overnight corporate business. He certainly would not book a trip on the exact weekend of his mother-in-law's funeral. Valerie was lying. Her husband was missing, and she had just tried to intercept a 6-figure wire transfer using generic, unverified legal documents. This behavior transcended everyday family greed. Greed is inherently patient. Greed hires accountants and files slow, steady paperwork through the proper channels. This was a 5-alarm emergency. Valerie was bleeding cash. She was desperately trying to cover up a financial disaster before anyone looked closely at her own ledger. I walked over to the trash can. I stepped on the metal pedal, and the plastic lid popped open. I reached past the damp floral foam and pulled out the green ceramic mug. It had not shattered against the side of the bin. I held it in both hands, brushing a stray dark coffee ground off the chipped rim. My fingers wrapped around the base. I stopped moving. The weight was wrong. A standard ceramic mug feels light and balanced in the hand, designed for easy lifting. This mug felt dense and bottom-heavy, like a solid block of industrial metal. I turned it over. The bottom of the cup was unusually thick. It was sealed with a hard, opaque resin that matched the faded green glaze of the ceramic. I ran my thumbnail over the surface. The resin was slightly uneven, scratched from years of sitting on the rough granite counter. Beatrice never drank from this mug because she liked the color. She kept it sitting on the counter in plain sight because no one ever looks twice at an ugly, chipped cup. She used it every day to ensure it never ended up packed away in a donation box or thrown out by a careless houseguest. Valerie thought she had locked me out of the estate. She thought taking the brass key from my ring secured her fortress and stripped me of my resources. But I knew Beatrice better than anyone in the family. I set the heavy mug back down on the granite island. The credit union account holding the cash was just the surface layer of a much deeper strategy. Valerie was hunting for quick, liquid assets to plug a sinking ship. But Beatrice had left me a physical map, hiding it right in front of her greedy daughter. I needed to figure out exactly what was hidden inside the heavy resin base before my aunt and her missing husband drafted their first legal subpoena. I drove back to my Providence apartment, tracking the coastal fog blurring the highway streetlights. The green ceramic mug sat securely in the passenger seat holder, heavy and silent. My apartment was a cramped third-floor walk-up with creaking radiators and thin walls. It provided a sharp contrast to the sprawling Warwick estate I had just left, but it was mine, paid for with nursing shifts that stretched into the early dawn. I walked into the narrow kitchen, flipping the overhead light switch. The fluorescent bulb buzzed, casting a stark, sterile glow across the limited counter space. I set the mug down next to a stack of incoming hospital mail. I reached into my bag to retrieve my badge lanyard, pulling it free with a sharp tug. The lanyard snagged the edge of the mail stack, dragging a thick envelope across the counter. The envelope clipped the base of the green mug. The heavy ceramic tipped. It slid toward the edge, hanging suspended over the linoleum floor for a fraction of a second before gravity claimed it. It hit the hard floor with a sharp, concussive crack. The impact bypassed the delicate rim entirely. The dense resin base took the full force of the fall, fracturing into 3 distinct, jagged pieces. The sound echoed through the small kitchen, loud enough to make my neighbor's dog bark through the thin drywall. I knelt on the cold linoleum, picking up the largest shard. The opaque green resin had split perfectly down the middle, revealing a hollowed-out cavity inside the thick bottom. Resting among the ceramic dust and broken glaze was a piece of dark metal. I pulled it free, brushing off a layer of dried glue. It was a skeleton key. The iron was heavy, cold, and coated in a thin layer of reddish-brown rust. The intricate teeth at the end were jagged, designed for an older internal locking mechanism, not a modern deadbolt. Beatrice had not just glued a key to the bottom of a cup, she had intentionally cast it inside the resin base, ensuring it could not be shaken loose or discovered by casual inspection. She drank her morning roast out of a crude, hidden vault for years, watching Valerie walk past it 100 times, complaining about the ugly dishware. The realization settled over me with a quiet, tactical clarity. Beatrice had anticipated her own physical decline. She knew the arthritis would eventually steal her mobility, leaving her vulnerable to her daughter's aggressive maneuvers. She engineered a physical safeguard, hiding the key to her actual assets inside the one object she knew Valerie would despise and discard. I stood up, clutching the cold iron. Valerie thought she held the upper hand because she confiscated my modern brass house key. But Valerie was sloppy. When you run a busy intensive care ward, you learn to anticipate supply shortages. You always carry a backup. I walked to my entryway table, opening a small wooden tray. Inside, resting next to spare batteries and loose change, was my secondary copy of the Warwick house key. The digital clock on my stove read 11:45. The coastal roads would be empty. I grabbed my jacket and headed back out the door. The drive south felt different this time. The initial shock of the credit union call had worn off, replaced by a clinical focus. I parked my car 3 blocks away from the Warwick property under the shadow of a large weeping willow tree. I walked the remaining distance, sticking to the damp grass to muffle my footsteps. The house sat dark and quiet against the night sky. Valerie's SUV was gone. I slipped around to the side door, the entrance Beatrice used for her gardening supplies. I slid my spare key into the deadbolt, turning it with a soft, metallic click. The door swung open. The air inside felt stale, smelling faintly of cardboard boxes and the sharp, metallic tang of the silver Valerie had bagged up earlier. I did not turn on any lights, relying on the ambient glow from the street lamps filtering through the sheer curtains. I bypassed the main living areas, heading straight for the basement door. The wooden stairs creaked softly under my weight. The basement was a labyrinth of forgotten decades. Dust motes danced in the beam of my small penlight. Stacked in the far corner, resting on a raised wooden pallet to avoid seasonal flooding, sat a massive cedar chest. It belonged to my grandfather. He built it by hand in the 1970s, reinforcing the corners with thick iron brackets. The lock on the front was an antique brass fixture, dull and oxidized. I approached the chest, shining my light across the lid. The surface was clean, wiped free of the thick dust that coated the surrounding boxes. Valerie had already been down here. I knelt on the concrete floor, holding the rusty skeleton key. I slid the jagged iron teeth into the brass keyhole. It fit perfectly. I turned my wrist, and the internal tumblers engaged with a heavy, satisfying clack. I lifted the heavy cedar lid. The hinges groaned in protest. The interior smelled sharply of mothballs and dried cedar wood. I angled my penlight down into the deep compartment. The chest was completely empty. Valerie had stripped it bare. Whatever heirlooms, financial ledgers, or vintage jewelry Beatrice had stored away were gone, packed into the trunk of a luxury SUV hours ago. My aunt was thorough. She operated with the frantic efficiency of a scavenger, picking a carcass clean before the other predators arrived. I ran my free hand along the smooth wooden bottom of the chest. The cedar planks were perfectly fitted, leaving no gaps. But my fingers brushed against a subtle anomaly. In the back right corner, the wood felt slightly raised. I pressed my thumbnail into the microscopic seam, applying firm downward pressure. A false bottom panel popped up, tilting slightly on a hidden pivot. Beatrice built the chest with her husband. She knew every structural secret. I pried the thin cedar panel away, setting it carefully on the concrete floor. Underneath, sitting in a shallow, recessed cavity, lay a single piece of heavy legal paper. It was not a will. It was not a bank ledger. It was folded neatly into perfect thirds. I picked it up and unfolded it under the beam of my light. The official seal of the Rhode Island Municipal Tax Authority was stamped across the top. It was a property tax receipt dated from the current fiscal year. The document listed a specific parcel identification number referencing 5 acres of undeveloped coastal land in Narragansett. The taxes were paid in full. The owner of record was not Beatrice Hill. The owner was a registered limited liability corporation named after my birth date. I stared at the black ink, the numbers blurring together as the implications locked into place. The Narragansett property was supposed to be gone. When I was 8 years old, the family held a massive shouting match in this exact house. Valerie screamed at her parents, demanding they liquidate the coastal land to fund her husband's failing business venture. They supposedly sold the acreage to an anonymous commercial developer shortly after that argument. Valerie spent her share of the profits within 18 months, buying a new pool and a luxury sports car. But Beatrice never sold it. She staged a complex paper transaction, creating a blind corporation to act as the buyer. She used her own savings to pay off Valerie, protecting the actual dirt from her daughter's relentless greed. The land had sat untouched, appreciating in value for 2 decades, while Valerie assumed it was covered in condominiums. The credit union account holding the $180,000 was a smokescreen. Valerie was currently deploying every legal maneuver she possessed to secure the liquid cash. She thought she was fighting a battle over an inactive wire transfer. She had no idea the real treasure was the acreage sitting quietly against the Atlantic shoreline, generating tax receipts mailed to a hidden post office box. I folded the heavy paper and slid it into my interior jacket pocket. The metal skeleton key went into my other pocket. I replaced the false cedar panel securing the empty chest. I walked back up the basement stairs, locking the side door behind me, and vanished into the foggy coastal night. By the time I reached my apartment, my phone screen was glowing bright on the passenger seat. I picked it up. A new text message sat waiting, sent from a number I had not saved. The message read, "Mom says you are trying to steal Grandma's estate. Back off, or we are getting a lawyer and calling your hospital administration." It was my cousin Tyler Valerie's oldest son. The threat was crude and clumsy, confirming my initial diagnosis. The enemy camp was panicking, acting on impulse rather than strategy. The conflict was no longer a private family dispute in a quiet kitchen. Valerie had officially launched a public offensive, bringing the next generation into the fray. She was preparing to burn my professional reputation to the ground to get her hands on the credit union cash. She did not know I was already holding the deed to the earth her own house was built on. The rhythmic buzzing started at 6 in the morning. My phone lay flat on the laminate nightstand, inching closer to the edge with every vibration. Buzz, pause. Buzz, buzz. The pattern was frantic and erratic. In the neonatal ward, we rely on auditory cues to separate minor issues from total system failures. When a premature infant drops their oxygen saturation, the telemetry monitor emits a specific, sharp, escalating chime. It is a sound designed to induce immediate action. I lay in bed watching the dark screen illuminate the cramped bedroom. I did not reach for the device immediately. I regulated my own breathing, counting inhaling for 4 seconds, holding for 2, exhaling for 4. Breathe, assess, stabilize. Only when my pulse rested at a steady resting rate did I pick up the phone. The notification screen was a waterfall of text alerts. Tyler had fired the warning shot last night, but Valerie had spent the early morning hours mobilizing the artillery. She created a Facebook group chat titled Beatrice Hill Estate Updates. She added 32 members, including aunts, uncles, second cousins from the West Coast, and family friends who had attended the funeral just yesterday. I opened the application. Valerie had posted a lengthy manifesto at 5:30 in the morning. The text was thick with capitalized letters and exclamation points. It read, "Family, I need to share a heartbreaking development. Mom was not in her right mind these past few months. We all knew her memory was failing. I just discovered Lenora manipulated her on her deathbed and hijacked a wire transfer for $180,000. She is trying to steal the estate. We are getting the authorities involved to protect Mom's legacy." The responses cascaded beneath her post. The digital mob formed with breathtaking speed. My Uncle Richard typed a paragraph expressing profound disappointment. A cousin in Seattle called me a predator. Tyler added a comment claiming I had trespassed at the Warwick property late at night, looking for more cash to steal. For my entire life, I served as the quiet background character at family gatherings. During Thanksgiving dinners, Valerie held court at the head of the table, pouring wine and dictating the conversation. I was the one who cleared the empty plates, wiped down the counters, and sat listening. The extended family interpreted my silence as a lack of ambition. They assumed my quiet demeanor meant I was weak, passive, and easily steamrolled. Valerie was now weaponizing that exact perception, framing my introverted nature as secretive and calculating. The accusations stung, but I recognized the tactic. Valerie needed to control the narrative before the probate court opened on Monday. If she convinced the entire bloodline I was a thief, the sheer volume of their outrage would create a smokescreen hiding her own financial ruin. I did not type a defense. I did not engage. Defending yourself to a mob only feeds their momentum. Instead, I pressed the side buttons on my phone. The screen flashed. A digital snapshot captured Valerie's initial post. I scrolled down, capturing Richard's response. Flash. I scrolled again, capturing Tyler's timeline of my whereabouts. Flash. I methodically archived every defamatory claim, every threat, and every lie. This digital trail was no longer just family drama. It was documented evidence of libel and coordinated harassment. I locked the phone and tossed it onto the bed. The digital war was a distraction. I had a physical piece of evidence sitting inside my jacket pocket that held far more weight than a social media post. I showered, changed into civilian clothes, and drove to the county clerk's office in downtown Providence. The municipal building was a brutalist concrete structure smelling of floor wax and decades of archived paper. I pulled a paper ticket from the dispenser and waited my turn in the hard plastic chairs. The digital number board beeped. I walked up to the thick glass partition, sliding the Narragansett property tax receipt underneath the small opening. The clerk was an older woman with a silver chain holding her reading glasses. I asked for the complete deed history and any recent modification filings for the parcel identification number listed on the paper. She typed the sequence into her terminal. The keyboard clacked in the quiet room. She frowned, adjusting her glasses. "Give me a moment," she murmured, standing up and walking back into the physical records vault. I waited, tracing the grain of the wooden counter with my index finger. Beatrice had executed a brilliant maneuver decades ago, using a blind, limited liability company to buy out Valerie's share of the coastal acreage. But the tax receipt I found in the false bottom of the cedar chest was dated from this current fiscal year. Beatrice was meticulous. She would not leave the corporate structure stagnant, knowing her health was rapidly declining. She would have reinforced the locks. The clerk returned, carrying a thin manila folder. She extracted a stack of photocopied legal documents, pushing them through the slot. I carried the pages to a wooden viewing table in the corner of the room. The initial deed transfer from the 1990s was complex, hiding Beatrice's identity behind a maze of corporate registration numbers. But I flipped past the historical data, seeking the most recent activity. 6 months ago, the deed structure was formally modified. Beatrice filed paperwork to update the managing members of the limited liability company. She solidified the legal language ensuring that upon her passing, sole proprietary control of the Narragansett acreage transferred directly to me. She bypassed the standard probate process entirely. The land was never part of her personal estate. It was a corporate asset, and I was now the sole executive. I read the dense legal paragraphs tracing the ink down to the final page. Documents of this magnitude modifying real estate ownership require a certified notary public to verify the identity and signatures of the acting parties. My eyes landed on the bottom right corner of the page. The circular blue ink stamp was pressed firmly into the paper, alongside a hurried cursive signature. The seal indicated the state of Rhode Island. I read the printed name inside the circular boundary, David Mitchell. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the name, reading it a second time, and then a third. Uncle David, Valerie's husband. The puzzle pieces shifted, forming a terrifying new picture. If David notarized this specific document 6 months ago, he knew about the coastal land. He knew the acreage had not been sold to an anonymous developer in the 90s. He knew Beatrice owned it. More importantly, he knew Beatrice was updating the corporate structure to give the land to me, explicitly cutting Valerie out of a multi-million-dollar asset. Why did he keep it a secret from his own wife? Why did he stamp his own name on the weapon Beatrice designed to defeat Valerie? Yesterday afternoon in the Warwick kitchen, Valerie warned me not to fight her. She casually mentioned David was out of town on business and would handle the estate lawyers when he returned. The rot was not isolated to my aunt. The corruption infected the marriage itself. Valerie was launching a frantic public smear campaign over a credit union account she thought was the ultimate prize. She was fighting a war she did not even understand. Meanwhile, her husband was running a parallel operation, hiding his involvement in the real estate transfer. David was playing his own game, moving pieces on a board Valerie could not see. I folded the deed modifications and placed them into my bag. I was no longer dealing with a single greedy relative throwing a temper tantrum. I was standing in the middle of a collapsing marriage built on hidden agendas and covert legal filings. The threats on my phone were escalating, and Valerie was preparing to weaponize the probate courts. I needed someone who understood the dark architecture of financial warfare. I needed legal firepower capable of matching the deceit I had just uncovered. I pulled out my phone, searching for the name of the most ruthless estate attorney in Providence. The law offices of Harrison Sterling occupied the top floor of a glass high-rise overlooking the Providence River. The reception area smelled of polished leather and bitter espresso, a stark contrast to the sterile, bleached corridors of my hospital ward. I sat in a high-backed chair, waiting while the administrative assistant processed my paperwork. I had researched Sterling extensively during my morning break. His reputation was formidable. Colleagues referred to him as a legal architect who specialized in dismantling complex, hostile estates. He did not advertise on billboards. He handled high-net-worth disputes operating with a cold, surgical precision. An oak door clicked open. Mr. Sterling stood in the threshold. He wore a tailored charcoal suit and a silver tie, holding a manila folder in his left hand. His hair was iron gray, sweeping back from a sharp, angular face. He gestured for me to enter, without offering a superficial smile. I walked into his office, taking a seat across from a wide, mahogany desk. I did not waste his hourly rate with emotional venting. I opened my bag and laid my evidence on the polished wood. I set down the printed screenshots of Valerie's digital smear campaign. I placed the original property tax receipt next to them. Finally, I smoothed out the copies of the Narragansett deed modifications bearing my Uncle David's circular notary stamp. Sterling picked up a gold fountain pen, tapping the nib against a legal pad as he reviewed the sequence of documents. He read fast, his eyes tracking back and forth across the dense paragraphs. He lingered on the notary stamp, turning the paper slightly to catch the light. "Your aunt is operating under the assumption that volume equals victory," he said. His voice was low and resonant. "She is using social media to build a preemptive defense mechanism, but the structural weakness lies here." He tapped the blue notary ink. If her husband certified a blind corporate land transfer shielding multi-million-dollar acreage from his own wife, their internal dynamic is fractured. Sterling rotated in his chair, facing a pair of glowing computer monitors. "Let us see what she filed with the municipal courts this morning." He typed a series of login credentials accessing the state probate registry. The mechanical hum of the computer tower filled the quiet room. Sterling navigated through the digital dockets, searching for Beatrice Hill. He stopped. His posture stiffened slightly. The gold pen ceased tapping. "We have a complication," he murmured. Sterling pressed a command key, and the heavy laser printer in the corner of the office spun to life. It hummed, pulling crisp white sheets through the rollers. He gathered the warm papers and slid them across the mahogany desk toward me. "Valerie officially petitioned the court to open probate 2 hours ago," Sterling explained. "She submitted a document claiming to be your grandmother's last will and testament. It is dated 8 months ago." I looked down at the freshly printed pages. The legal phrasing was standard, declaring the revocation of all prior wills and codicils. I scanned the asset distribution clauses. The text explicitly named Valerie as the sole beneficiary of all physical property, financial accounts, and personal effects. Furthermore, it contained a specific exclusionary clause. A single sentence explicitly stated that Lenora Hill was to receive nothing, citing a permanent breakdown in the familial relationship. My eyes drifted down to the final page resting on the signature line. I stared at the blue ink replica of my grandmother's name. In the medical field, you learn to read a patient's physical limitations through their fine motor skills. 2 years ago, Beatrice suffered a severe flare-up of rheumatoid arthritis. The cartilage in her hands deteriorated. Her knuckles swelled into painful, rigid knots. Watching her try to hold a spoon or button a sweater was an exercise in enduring physical agony. Her genuine handwriting reflected that trauma. It was a series of jagged, erratic spikes breaking apart in the middle of syllables. The signature resting on this legal document flowed with elegant, unbroken loops. The cursive was smooth, applying even pressure across the paper. It was a beautiful signature. It belonged to someone with perfect joint mobility. "This is a forgery," I said. My voice remained steady, despite the cold weight settling in my stomach. Beatrice could not hold a pen steady enough to write like this. She had severe joint degradation. Sterling steepled his fingers, resting his chin against his hands. "I believe you, Lenora, but belief holds zero currency in a courtroom." He leaned forward, pointing at the notary seal stamped next to the forged signature. It was not David's stamp this time. It belonged to an unknown third party. Under Rhode Island probate law, a notarized will carries an automatic presumption of validity, Sterling explained. The court assumes the document is authentic until proven otherwise. Right now, Valerie holds the legal high ground. She is the designated executor. She wields the authority of the state. I pointed to the Narragansett deed modifications. But we have proof her husband was hiding corporate land transfers. We can show their timeline is corrupt. Sterling shook his head. You are confusing the assets. Valerie is running a deliberate misdirection. Look at the secondary injunction she filed alongside this fake will. He pulled another sheet from the printer. It was an emergency petition targeting Providence Coastal Credit Union. Valerie formally requested a judicial freeze and immediate transfer of the inactive wire routing numbers. She is hyper-focused on the liquid cash, Sterling continued. The credit union account is her singular target. This is a classic red herring strategy, whether she realizes it or not. She is burning all her legal ammunition to seize the $180,000. She remains entirely ignorant of the coastal acreage generating those tax receipts. Her desperation is blinding her to the larger board. But if she gets the cash, she wins, I replied. Sterling nodded. If a judge validates this 2023 will, she secures the legal right to empty that credit union account by the end of the week. Challenging a forged signature is a grueling process. It requires hiring forensic handwriting analysts, scheduling depositions, and surviving months of costly litigation. Valerie knows you are a nurse working a hospital salary. She is betting you cannot afford the financial attrition required to fight a protracted legal battle. She expects you to fold under the pressure. A sharp chime interrupted our conversation. Sterling glanced at his secondary monitor. His expression hardened. He read the incoming electronic notification from the county clerk portal. Valerie just escalated her timeline, he said. Her attorney requested an expedited hearing based on your interference with the wire transfer yesterday. The judge agreed. The preliminary hearing to release the credit union funds is scheduled for this Friday at 9 in the morning. I looked at the calendar on his desk. It was Tuesday. We had less than 72 hours. We do not have months to hire handwriting experts, I realized aloud. We cannot wait for depositions. Sterling closed the manila folder. We need an irrefutable defense mechanism, something physical, objective, and immune to cross-examination. We have to prove your grandmother was legally incapable of executing that document on the specific date listed. Without an undeniable countermeasure, Valerie walks out of that courtroom on Friday with a six-figure check. I stared at the smooth, looping forgery on the desk. The date stamped next to the fake signature was October 14th. I closed my eyes, accessing my mental timeline of my grandmother's final year. In early October, Beatrice suffered a dangerous respiratory infection. She was transferred from the standard assisted living wing into a specialized acute care unit for observation. During that specific window, Valerie assumed total control over the visitor log. She restricted my access, citing doctor orders, claiming Beatrice needed uninterrupted rest. The pieces began aligning, forming a clear path through the legal blockade. Valerie used that isolation period to manufacture the forged documents. She kept me away so she could arrange the fake paperwork without interference. But Valerie was not a medical professional. She did not understand how modern healthcare infrastructure operated. She assumed a closed door meant a secret remained buried. She forgot that every single interaction, medication dosage, and physiological change inside a licensed care facility is tracked, timed, and permanently recorded. I looked across the mahogany desk at Sterling. My pulse ticked with a slow, rhythmic certainty. "I need you to draft a medical subpoena," I told him. "My aunt thinks she controls the narrative because she filed a piece of paper. But people lie. Vitals do not. I am going to pull my grandmother's clinical charts." The electronic medical records arrived via secure, encrypted transfer at 2 p.m. Sterling printed the file and handed me a stack of papers nearly 3 inches thick. The documents chronicled Beatrice's final months inside the acute care wing of the assisted living facility. To a lawyer or a judge, these pages represented a dense, unreadable maze of clinical jargon and numeric codes. But I was a nurse. I lived inside these acronyms every day. I carried the heavy stack to the small conference table in Sterling's office, laying them flat and uncapping a yellow highlighter. I needed to cross-reference the exact date Valerie claimed the fake will was executed. October 14th. I flipped past the intake forms and the physical therapy evaluations, drilling down into the daily medication administration records. The sterile smell of the printer ink triggered a sharp, involuntary memory. The clinical scent transported me back 7 years to my first week working the neonatal intensive care unit. The ward hummed with the constant, rhythmic beeping of cardiac monitors and the soft, mechanical hiss of infant ventilators. Beatrice had insisted on visiting during my lunch break. She stood near the scrub sink, wearing a bright yellow cardigan, ignoring the complex machinery surrounding her. She watched me frantically reviewing a disorganized patient file, trying to reconcile a conflicting doctor's note. She reached out, resting her twisted, arthritic hand over my frantic fingers. "Always check the charts twice, Lenny," she murmured. Her voice cut through the sterile hospital noise, calm and absolute. "People lie. People manipulate. Vitals do not. The truth always leaves a physiological footprint." I snapped back to the present, staring down at the clinical logs resting on the conference table. Beatrice was right. Valerie and David were trying to rewrite history using forged legal documents, but they could not erase the pharmaceutical footprint their actions required. I located the entry for October 14th. I ran my finger down the vertical column tracking the hourly medication dosages administered by the nursing staff. At 8 a.m, Beatrice received her standard regimen: blood pressure medication, anti-inflammatory steroids for her joints, a mild digestive aid. But at 1 p.m, the chart shifted drastically. The attending physician prescribed a heavy dose of intravenous lorazepam. It is a powerful benzodiazepine used to manage severe acute anxiety or agitation. The nursing notes indicated Beatrice experienced a sudden panic attack requiring immediate chemical sedation. The dose administered was significant enough to induce profound lethargy and impair basic cognitive function for several hours. I highlighted the dosage block in bright yellow ink. My pulse hammered a steady, victorious rhythm against my ribs. Sterling looked up from his computer monitor, adjusting his silver tie. "You found something." I turned the page facing him. Valerie submitted a forged will dated October 14th. Her legal team claims Beatrice was of sound mind and body when she supposedly signed away her entire estate to her daughter. I tapped the yellow highlighted rectangle. According to the certified nursing logs, Beatrice received a heavy dose of intravenous sedatives at 1 in the afternoon. She was chemically incapacitated. The attending nurse specifically noted profound lethargy and a failure to rouse to verbal stimuli at 2:30. There is zero medical possibility Beatrice possessed the necessary cognitive awareness or physical coordination to execute a legally binding document on that afternoon. Sterling leaned back in his leather chair, exhaling a slow breath. He recognized the magnitude of the discovery. Medical records carry immense weight in a probate dispute. They establish an objective clinical timeline that supersedes witness testimony. "We just demolished the foundation of her emergency petition," he said. "A judge will look at this medication log and immediately flag the will as highly suspicious." Valerie's claim to the credit union account just hit a brick wall. "We are not finished," I replied. My eyes tracked back to the top of the clinical file. If Beatrice was heavily sedated and medically isolated, someone else had to physically maneuver the forged paperwork during that specific window of time. I needed to know who was inside that room while my grandmother lay incapacitated. I flipped to the back of the stack, locating the facility visitor logs. The acute care wing maintained strict security protocols, requiring every guest to sign in and out at the main reception desk. Valerie had restricted my access during this period, citing doctor's orders to ensure Beatrice rested. She built a physical perimeter around her mother. I scanned the entries for the second week of October, searching for Valerie's name. Her name did not appear on October 14th. Valerie was not even in the building on the day the fake will was supposedly executed. I traced my finger down the printed log, moving line by line. At 1:45, a single visitor signed into the acute care wing, checking out exactly 40 minutes later. The handwriting on the sign-in sheet was hurried but legible. David Mitchell. The puzzle locked together with devastating clarity. The operation was a coordinated strike utilizing chemical restraint and marital deception. Valerie ordered my exclusion from the facility to clear the battlefield. Then, someone, likely Valerie herself, agitated Beatrice enough to require chemical sedation. Once Beatrice was incapacitated, Uncle David walked past the reception desk carrying the forged paperwork. He bypassed his own wife, slipping into the room while Beatrice was unconscious. He secured the fake signature and stamped the document with an anonymous rotary seal, ensuring his own name remained hidden from the legal filings. But David was sloppy. He failed to realize his signature on the visitor log placed him at the exact scene of the crime during the precise window of medical incapacitation. Valerie thought she was the mastermind, orchestrating a brilliant legal theft. She was screaming on Facebook and filing emergency injunctions to steal a wire transfer. She did not realize her own husband was running a parallel covert operation, manipulating the timeline behind her back. David notarized the secret corporate land transfer 6 months ago. Then he orchestrated the forged will on October 14th. The man was drowning in an ocean of hidden debt, pulling strings in the dark to secure his own financial survival. I stacked the highlighted pages, tapping the edges against the mahogany table to align them perfectly. I handed the file back to Sterling. "We have the countermeasure," I said. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, stripped of emotion, replaced by clinical certainty. "We have the pharmaceutical footprint, and we have the physical intruder. Valerie expects me to walk into that courtroom on Friday and beg a judge to believe my word against her forged document. She expects a scared, exhausted nurse." Sterling slid the medical records into his leather briefcase, snapping the brass latches shut. He did not smile, but a cold professional satisfaction radiated from his posture. "She is going to face a forensic ambush," he noted. The intercom on Sterling's desk buzzed a sharp, intrusive electronic tone. His administrative assistant spoke through the speaker. Her voice was strained, tight with forced professionalism. "Mr. Sterling, I apologize for the interruption," she said, "but Ms. Hill needs to check her phone immediately. There is a situation developing at her workplace." I pulled my cell phone from my jacket pocket. The screen displayed 4 missed calls from the central administrative desk at the hospital. A 5th call began vibrating against my palm. I answered, pressing the device to my ear. "Lenora," it was my shift supervisor, Brenda. Her voice echoed against the tile walls of the hospital corridor. "I need you to return to the neonatal intensive care unit immediately. The security guards are trying to de-escalate the situation, but your aunt is screaming in the main waiting area. She brought a process server with her. She is demanding you come down and face her in front of the entire pediatric staff." The cold certainty in my stomach evaporated, replaced by a sudden adrenaline spike. Valerie realized the legal clock was ticking toward Friday, and her smear campaign on social media was failing to break my resolve. She abandoned the digital battlefield, seeking a physical confrontation. She chose to strike at the center of my professional sanctuary, dragging the toxic warfare into the sterile corridors where I fought to save fragile lives. I gripped the edge of the conference table, recognizing the immediate threat. The battle was no longer confined to courtrooms and hidden keys. Valerie was launching a direct assault on my livelihood. I ended the call, sliding the phone back into my scrub jacket pocket. Sterling watched me from across the mahogany desk, reading the shift in my posture. I did not need to explain the situation. The sterile reality of my profession was colliding directly with the toxic fallout of my family. I thanked him for the clinical charts, gathered my bag, and walked out of the high-rise building. The drive from downtown Providence to Rhode Island General Hospital took 14 minutes. I navigated the mid-afternoon traffic with mechanical efficiency. My hands gripped the steering wheel, but my mind was already compartmentalizing the incoming threat. Valerie possessed a distinct psychological profile. When she felt cornered, she relied on public humiliation to force compliance. She operated on the assumption that other people valued social decorum more than they valued the truth. She expected me to shrink back and surrender to avoid a scene in front of my peers. I parked in the employee garage and swiped my badge at the rear staff entrance. The heavy double doors slid open, releasing a rush of cool, climate-controlled air, smelling sharply of antiseptic and floor wax. I bypassed the locker room and walked straight toward the 4th-floor elevator bank. The digital numbers above the metal doors counted up, ticking off the floors until they chimed at the neonatal intensive care unit. The NICU waiting room is a sacred environment. It is a quiet holding area where exhausted parents sit in pastel chairs, drinking stale coffee, and praying for premature infants hooked to complex respiratory machines. Voices are kept low. Movements are careful. It is a sanctuary built for genuine human crisis. Valerie was violating that space with every breath she took. I stepped out of the elevator. My aunt stood in the center of the waiting area, wearing a tailored camel trench coat and clutching a designer leather handbag. Beside her stood a bored-looking man in a rumpled navy windbreaker, holding a thick manila envelope. 2 hospital security guards in dark blue uniforms flanked the entrance to the actual medical ward. My shift supervisor, Brenda, stood between the guards and Valerie, holding her arms crossed over her chest in a protective stance. Several of my fellow nurses peered through the glass partitions, their eyes wide with concern. Valerie spotted me stepping off the elevator. She pointed a manicured finger in my direction. Her voice echoed off the acoustic ceiling tiles, sharp and uninhibited. "There she is," Valerie announced. The parents sitting in the waiting area flinched, pulling their coats tighter around their shoulders. The man in the windbreaker stepped forward, intercepting my path. He did not look angry or dramatic. He looked like a private contractor earning $50 for a delivery. "Lenora Hill?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. He held out the manila envelope. "You have been served." He dropped his arm, turned around, and walked back toward the elevators without waiting for a response. He wanted no part of the theater. Valerie, however, was just getting started. She took a step closer, ensuring her voice carried across the room to the security guards and my supervisor. "I want you to read that document, Lenora," she demanded. "It is a formal, legal order. You are a thief. You manipulated a dying woman to hijack her financial assets, and I am putting a stop to it. If you contact the credit union again or try to access the estate, I will have you arrested for elder abuse." Brenda uncrossed her arms, stepping forward. "Ma'am, you need to lower your voice or I will have you physically removed from this floor. This is a critical care unit." Valerie waved a hand, dismissing the warning. "I am done here anyway. I just needed to make sure she understood the consequences of stealing from her own family." I stood still, holding the manila envelope. I did not yell back. I did not defend myself to the staring room. In my profession, reacting to hysteria only breeds more chaos. I pulled the metal clasp back and opened the flap. I slid the paperwork out and unfolded it under the bright fluorescent lights. It was a standard cease and desist order. The paragraphs were filled with dense, threatening legal jargon, demanding I immediately halt all communication regarding the Beatrice Hill estate. But my eyes bypassed the empty threats and focused on the physical details of the document itself. The paper was thin, cheap copy stock. The ink was slightly faded, indicating a home printer running low on toner. Most importantly, I looked at the top left corner. There was no embossed law firm logo. There was no custom letterhead belonging to a prestigious Providence attorney. Instead, a pixelated generic crest sat in the margin. Beneath it, in a standard, unformatted font, read the words, "Legal Document Services Online." I read the text again, processing the reality of what I was holding. Valerie was bluffing. If my aunt actually possessed the formidable legal war chest she projected, she would have hired a real litigator to serve a legitimate court-ordered injunction. Instead, she logged onto a budget internet website, downloaded a generic template, and printed it in her home office. She hired a freelance courier to deliver it, hoping the sheer public shock of the ambush would terrify me into submission. She was trying to intimidate me on the cheap because she was secretly out of money. The credit union account was frozen. The hidden offshore gambling debts were mounting. She and David were bleeding cash so rapidly they could not even afford the retainer fee for a real attorney to draft a simple warning letter. The designer coat and the expensive handbag were a facade. Valerie was running on fumes, projecting strength while standing on a collapsing foundation. I folded the cheap paper along its original creases and slid it back into the envelope. I looked at my aunt. The frantic pulse was still jumping at the base of her throat. "Security," Brenda said, her voice firm and authoritative. "Escort this woman off the premises immediately. If she returns, call the Providence police." The two officers stepped forward, placing themselves on either side of Valerie. They did not touch her, but their presence was an undeniable physical barrier. Valerie recognized the shift in the room. Her theatrical performance had failed to elicit a screaming match or a tearful breakdown. She had played her loudest card, and I simply stood there, holding her cheap, downloaded prop. She began walking backward toward the elevator bank, her heels clicking against the linoleum. She maintained her defiant posture, refusing to break eye contact with me. As the elevator doors slid open behind her, she played her final hand. "You think you can drag this out in court, Lenora?" she called out. "You think you can stall until Friday? I am selling the Warwick house today. The cash buyers are meeting me at the property at 3 o'clock. They are taking it as is. You are locked out forever." The metal doors slid shut, cutting off her voice. The waiting room fell back into a stunned, uneasy silence. Brenda placed a hand on my shoulder, asking if I needed to take the rest of the shift off. I shook my head, thanking her and the security team, before walking toward the break room. I sat down at a small plastic table, staring at the blank wall. Valerie's parting threat echoed in my mind. The cash buyers are meeting me at 3 o'clock. In the Rhode Island coastal real estate market, a cash buyer taking a property as is means only one thing. It means a corporate flipping company is stepping in. They target desperate sellers offering fast, liquid capital in exchange for purchasing the property below market value. But cash buyers do not want the history of the house. They want a blank canvas. The moment the paperwork clears, they send in demolition crews. They bring in heavy dumpsters and crowbars, gutting the interior down to the wooden studs within 24 hours. A cold spike of dread shot through my chest. When I was 19 years old, Beatrice sat me down in her small sewing room located in the back of the Warwick house. She moved the heavy vintage Singer sewing machine, revealing a loose floorboard near the radiator pipe. She told me that paper was fragile and banks made mistakes. She said if anyone ever tried to steal our history, I would know exactly where the real foundation was buried. Valerie submitted a forged document to the probate court, claiming it was the final testament. But the authentic document, the true 2018 handwritten will granting me the house, was still sitting inside a metal lockbox beneath those floorboards. If Valerie sold the property to a flipping company this afternoon, the demolition crew would arrive by tomorrow morning. They would tear up the flooring, smashing through the vintage wood with sledgehammers. The metal lockbox and the authentic will inside would be tossed into a commercial dumpster and buried in a municipal landfill before the end of the week. Valerie would erase the only physical proof capable of exposing her fraudulent real estate transaction. I looked at the clock on the break room wall. It was 2:30. Valerie was meeting the buyers right now. The locks would be changed by sunset. If I waited until tomorrow, the true will would be destroyed. The only window of opportunity left was the dark, quiet hours between midnight and dawn. I needed to return to the Warwick estate one last time, and I needed to rip up the floorboards before the sledgehammers arrived. I left the hospital through the rear staff exit. The gray Rhode Island sky mirrored the cold urgency settling in my chest. If Valerie finalized the fast cash sale of the Warwick estate this afternoon, the corporate flipping company would assume physical control of the property. Demolition crews operate with brutal efficiency. They arrive at dawn with sledgehammers and heavy dumpsters, tearing out vintage fixtures to modernize the floor plan. The true handwritten will Beatrice hid beneath the sewing room floorboards would be shredded and buried in a municipal landfill before the weekend. I needed a structural mechanism to halt the real estate transfer immediately. I drove straight to the glass high-rise overlooking the Providence River. Mr. Sterling sat behind his mahogany desk reviewing a thick legal binder. He listened to my account of the hospital ambush without interrupting. When I detailed the threat of the immediate cash sale, his posture shifted. He understood the mechanical reality of corporate property flippers. "We cannot file a standard judicial injunction before 5 o'clock, he explained. The state probate courts are closed for the day. Your aunt currently holds the forged executor paperwork, giving her the temporary authority to liquidate physical assets. We need an alternative anchor to freeze her legal mobility." I reached into my scrub jacket pocket and pulled out the folded property tax receipt I had discovered inside the false bottom of the cedar chest. I placed the heavy paper on his desk, smoothing out the creases. Beatrice paid the municipal taxes on this Narragansett acreage last month. If Valerie is trying to liquidate the Warwick house to cover her hidden debts, maybe she is attempting to locate and liquidate this coastal parcel too. Can we use this corporate entity to file a commercial lien and slow her down? Sterling picked up the document. He adjusted his reading glasses and typed the specific parcel identification number into his dual monitors, accessing the state commercial real estate database. The quiet hum of the computer tower filled the silence. He cross-referenced the blind limited liability company listed as the owner of record on the receipt. The company was registered under a distinct numerical sequence, 6/12/89. It was my date of birth. Sterling clicked through the archived registration files. Beatrice established the corporation over 2 decades ago. She listed herself as the initial managing director, but she structured the succession clause with deliberate foresight. The legal language was designed to trigger an automatic transfer of executive control upon her passing. As of last week, I was the sole proprietor and managing director of the corporation. He opened a secondary window, loading a geographical zoning map of the Narragansett coastline. He entered the parcel coordinates. A high-resolution satellite image loaded on the monitor. The 5 acres of prime coastal land had never been sold to an anonymous commercial developer in the 1990s. Beatrice retained the deed, hiding it behind the corporate veil. The satellite map showed a private gated cul-de-sac containing 3 sprawling, custom-built luxury homes. Sterling zoomed in on the center property. The estate featured a sweeping circular driveway, a manicured lawn, and a large custom swimming pool overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. He pulled the municipal tax records for the physical structure itself. The physical house was registered to David and Valerie Mitchell. I stared at the glowing monitor. The puzzle pieces rearranged themselves, forming a picture of breathtaking strategic brilliance. Valerie told the entire family she used her share of the supposed land sale in the 90s to build her dream home. She boasted about the architectural design and the ocean views at every holiday gathering. But she never purchased the dirt. Sterling explained the architecture of a commercial ground lease. In elite coastal communities, residents often purchase or construct the physical house, but lease the earth underneath it from a master trust. It reduces the upfront construction costs and provides a steady income stream for the landowner. Valerie and David signed a 99-year ground lease, thinking they were paying a faceless corporate development firm. They pay a substantial monthly premium to maintain their legal right to occupy the property, Sterling said. He traced the corporate routing numbers attached to the receiving account. The lease payments are automatically drafted on the first of every month. He pointed to the final destination account on the screen. The funds are routed directly into the Providence Coastal Credit Union. The breath caught in my throat. The $180,000 sitting in the frozen account was not random savings Beatrice hoarded from her pension. It was the accumulated sum of Valerie's own lease payments over the last 2 decades. Beatrice had weaponized Valerie's vanity against her. Valerie wanted the social prestige of a coastal mansion so badly, she never investigated the corporate landlord cashing her checks. She had been funding my inheritance month after month, year after year. I did not just have a legal claim to a frozen bank account. I literally owned the earth beneath my aunt's feet. If she failed to pay the monthly lease, or if the corporate owner decided to terminate the agreement for a breach of contract, she would forfeit the structure. She would lose the foundation of her entire life. Beatrice sat at Thanksgiving dinners listening to her daughter brag about the custom swimming pool, knowing she owned the soil holding the water. She built an invisible financial fortress designed to activate the moment Valerie tried to steal my future. My cell phone buzzed inside my bag, vibrating against a plastic pen. I pulled it out. A text message from my cousin Tyler glowed on the screen. It was not a coordinated legal threat drafted by a professional. It was the raw, erratic lashing out of a drowning man. "You think you are so smart," he wrote. "Dad is liquidating our college funds today. The credit cards are declining at the grocery store. You ruined our family, and I am going to make sure you lose your nursing license before this week is over." The threat did not induce fear. It provided clinical confirmation of my diagnosis. The enemy camp was starving for capital. David was draining his own children's accounts to appease his hidden creditors. Valerie was trying to sell the Warwick house for pennies on the dollar to cover the immediate hemorrhage. They were trapped in a financial death spiral. The designer clothes and the aggressive social media posts were just a facade masking their total ruin. I looked at Sterling. We possessed the ultimate leverage. I controlled the ground lease to their primary residence. We held the medical charts, proving the 2023 will was a forgery. We tracked David signing into the hospice ward to execute the fraud. But owning the Narragansett dirt did not save the Warwick house today. Valerie still held the forged executor paperwork. She still possessed the perceived authority to hand the keys to a demolition crew. If she signed a fast cash contract this afternoon, the buyers would secure legal access to the interior of the property. The true handwritten will remained trapped beneath the sewing room floorboards, a fragile piece of paper sitting in the dark. I needed that specific document to finalize the trap. The 2018 will explicitly named me as the sole inheritor of the Warwick estate. Presenting that authentic document would instantly vaporize Valerie's fraudulent real estate transaction and expose her forgery to the probate judge. "We have the leverage," I told Sterling, "but we need the final piece of physical evidence to close the jaws of the trap." He leaned back in his leather chair, studying my face. "You cannot file an injunction without it," he warned. "The property flippers operate fast. Once they take possession, the interior is compromised." "I know," I replied. I slipped my phone back into my bag. "I am going to retrieve it tonight." I left the high-rise and walked back to my car. The coastal fog was already rolling in off the harbor, masking the city skyline in a thick, gray haze. I had 12 hours before the morning sun broke. I needed to return to the Warwick estate, navigate the dark, empty house, and rip up the vintage floorboards before the sledgehammers arrived. The coastal fog grew thicker as midnight approached, clinging to the street lamps along the empty Rhode Island highways. I drove without the radio on, letting the steady hum of the engine focus my thoughts. The Warwick property sat in darkness when I arrived. A bright yellow real estate lockbox hung heavy on the front door handle, confirming my worst clinical diagnosis. The corporate flippers had already signed preliminary paperwork securing their physical access for the morning. They owned the primary entrance, but they lacked the institutional memory of the structure itself. I navigated the damp grass, slipping around to the side gardening door. My brass key slid into the deadbolt. The mechanism yielded with a soft, metallic click. I stepped inside the stagnant air. The house felt hollow, stripped of its history, smelling only of dust and lingering lemon polish. I moved through the shadows without a flashlight, relying on decades of muscle memory. I bypassed the empty living room and the stripped dining area, heading straight for the narrow hallway leading to the back sewing room. The space was cramped, smelling faintly of old thread and machine oil. In the far corner sat Beatrice's vintage Singer sewing machine. The cast iron base was incredibly heavy, designed to anchor the equipment during high-speed stitching. I planted my feet against the baseboards, gripping the cold iron frame with both hands. I engaged my core muscles and pushed. The iron legs groaned against the oak floorboards, sliding just enough to expose a specific section of the vintage wood near the radiator pipe. I knelt on the floor, running my fingertips along the seams between the wooden planks. The third board from the wall featured a microscopic gap. I used a flathead screwdriver from my jacket pocket, wedging the steel tip into the tight space. I applied downward leverage. The old nails shrieked a high-pitched sound that echoed in the quiet house. The board popped upward, releasing a puff of trapped drywall dust. I reached into the dark cavity beneath the flooring. My fingers brushed against cold, heavy steel. I pulled out a gray, fireproof lockbox. The hinges were stiff, but the latch was unlocked. I opened the lid. Resting inside on a bed of silica packets lay a pristine stack of ivory paper. The ink was jagged, erratic, and undeniably authentic. It was the true testament, drafted in 2018, granting the Warwick estate entirely to me. I secured the lid, tucked the box under my arm, and disappeared back into the coastal fog, leaving the floorboard empty for the demolition crews. By 8 in the morning, I sat across from Harrison's Sterling. The gray lockbox rested on his polished mahogany desk. He reviewed the jagged cursive signature, comparing it against the forged document Valerie submitted to the probate court. The lawyer smiled a tight, predatory expression. "We now hold the absolute title," he stated, tapping the ivory paper. "The cash sale your aunt orchestrated yesterday is officially void. I will file an emergency stop order with the county clerk before noon. The property flippers will arrive to find a judicial barricade. But while you were securing the physical foundation of the estate, I spent the night excavating the financial rot beneath your uncle." Sterling rotated his monitor outward, displaying a complex spreadsheet filled with international routing codes. "David Mitchell is not just a passive husband complying with a greedy wife," the attorney explained. "He is the active architect of his own destruction." I cross-referenced the municipal notary seal he used on the Narragansett corporate transfer. That thread led me into a maze of restricted credit inquiries. David manages a modest suburban commercial portfolio, but his private ledger is bleeding to death. He holds staggering liabilities tied to offshore sports betting syndicates based in the Caribbean. These particular bookmakers do not send polite collection letters. They demand immediate liquid capital, and they apply severe personal pressure to collect. Sterling pulled up a secondary digital bank statement highlighting a specific transaction from 6 months ago. Beatrice transferred exactly $10,000 into a shell account controlled by David. She paid him a direct bribe. She needed the coastal acreage deed notarized quietly to bypass her own daughter. David accepted the cash because he was desperate to pacify his overseas creditors. He sold out his marriage for $10,000. When Beatrice passed away, the gambling debts resurfaced with renewed aggression. David realized the frozen credit union account held $180,000. He orchestrated the forged October 14th testament not to help his wife secure her lifestyle, but to hijack the funds for his bookies. Valerie thinks she is fighting for social prestige. Her husband is fighting for his physical safety. My cell phone vibrated against the leather armrest of my chair. The caller identification displayed a local area code associated with David. I held up a hand signaling the attorney to remain silent. I let the incoming call route directly to the automated messaging system. 60 seconds later, the notification tone chimed. I pressed the screen to broadcast the audio recording into the quiet office. "Lenora, sweetie, it is Uncle David." His tone dripped with an artificial, sugary warmth. The vocal inflection was carefully calibrated to sound paternal and comforting. "I know things have escalated out of control these past few days. Your aunt is operating under a tremendous amount of emotional stress, and she is making some very poor decisions. I want to help you fix this mess. Let us grab coffee this afternoon, just the two of us. We can smooth everything over and find a quiet solution that protects you. Call me back, kiddo." The audio recording ended with a sharp click. The silence in the office felt electrically charged. The enemy camp was actively fracturing. Valerie was orchestrating a loud public circus at the hospital, throwing tantrums in the intensive care waiting room. Meanwhile, her husband was operating in the shadows, offering to betray her. David assumed my quiet nature meant I was naive and easily manipulated. He believed a few kind words and a gentle tone could lure me into a negotiated surrender. He wanted to secure a portion of the cash before his wife torpedoed the entire estate in front of a probate judge. "He is laying a trap," I said. My pulse maintained a steady, even rhythm. He knows the forged paperwork carries an immense legal risk. If he can coerce me into signing a settlement waiver, he bypasses the judicial scrutiny entirely. He gets his gambling money and walks away clean, leaving his wife to face the fallout alone. Sterling reached into his desk drawer, extracting a thin, black digital interface cable. "Let him try," the lawyer replied. His voice held a cold, strategic edge. In the state of Rhode Island, audio surveillance laws operate under a one-party consent statute. As long as one active participant in the conversation authorizes the recording, the captured audio is fully admissible as evidence in a court of law. Since you are an active participant, you possess the legal authority to document every single syllable he speaks today. The attorney connected my phone to his computer terminal. He installed a proprietary high-definition audio recording application utilized by private investigators. The software operated invisibly, running deep in the background, without displaying a bright red status bar or emitting periodic warning beeps. The microphone calibration is optimized to filter out ambient background noise, like espresso machines and ambient chatter, Sterling explained, handing the device back across the desk. You will place the unit face down on the table between you. It will capture his exact vocal frequencies with perfect clarity. I looked at the dark glass screen resting in my palm. In the neonatal unit, diagnosing a failing system requires listening closely to the subtle variations in a tiny heartbeat. Today, I was diagnosing a collapsing marriage. David was inviting me to a public coffee shop to extort my inheritance. He intended to leverage his fake paternal warmth to extract a financial settlement. He had no idea I already possessed the clinical charts, the property deed, his notary stamp, and the authentic handwritten testament. He thought he was luring a frightened, tired nurse into a quiet corner. He did not know he was walking blind into a surgical ambush. The coffee shop on Thayer Street hummed with the chaotic energy of university students and hurried downtown professionals. The air carried the bitter scent of roasted espresso beans and scorched milk. Behind the main counter, a commercial grinder roared to life, pulverizing dark roasts into fine powder. The barista yelled out a sequence of customized beverage orders over the ambient noise of 50 overlapping conversations. It was the ideal environment for a covert operation. The chaotic acoustic landscape provided a false sense of security, masking the quiet surgical trap I was about to spring. I secured a small circular table situated in the far back corner, away from the large plate glass windows. I sat facing the entrance, positioning myself to observe the entire room. I ordered a plain black drip coffee, resting the ceramic mug on a folded paper napkin. I pulled my cell phone from my jacket, retrieving the digital recording application Mr. Sterling installed hours earlier. I tapped the activation icon. The screen darkened, shifting into a stealth background mode. I placed the device face down on the center of the wooden table. The proprietary software began filtering the ambient cafe noise, isolating the immediate acoustic radius around my chair. David arrived 12 minutes late. He walked through the heavy glass doors, scanning the crowded room with rapid, nervous physical movements. He wore his standard suburban uniform, consisting of a pressed pastel polo shirt underneath a tailored navy blazer. But the pristine country club facade was failing. A thin sheen of perspiration coated his forehead, despite the brisk Rhode Island autumn chill. The skin around his eyes appeared sallow and bruised, indicating severe sleep deprivation. He spotted me in the corner and forced his facial muscles into a bright, paternal smile. The expression did not reach his eyes. He navigated through the narrow aisle of tables, pulling out the metal chair across from me. He sat down heavily, exhaling a long breath designed to project exhaustion and familial solidarity. "Lenny, sweetie," he began, leaning forward and resting his forearms on the table. "Thank you for meeting me. I know the past 48 hours have been a waking nightmare for you." I did not offer a polite greeting. I did not touch my coffee. I simply maintained eye contact, watching his pupils dart back and forth, assessing my emotional state. In the neonatal intensive care unit, a sudden drop in a patient's core temperature, combined with a rapid, erratic pulse, indicates imminent shock. David was exhibiting the exact physiological markers of a man running out of time. "Your aunt is losing her grip on reality," he continued, lowering his vocal volume to a conspiratorial whisper. "She is grieving her mother, and she is directing all that toxic anger at you. The hospital stunt she pulled yesterday was unforgivable. I told her she crossed a permanent line, but she refuses to listen to reason. She is determined to drag this estate dispute into a public courtroom and burn everything to the ground." He paused, waiting for me to validate his assessment. When I offered nothing but silence, he shifted his weight, adjusting the collar of his polo shirt. "I want to stop the bleeding," he said. "I want to protect your career and your sanity. Legal battles drain your bank account and destroy your mental health. We can bypass the attorneys entirely. If we sit down together and sign a mutual settlement waiver, we can end this war today. You release your claim on half the credit union funds, allowing Valerie to take $90,000. You keep the remaining $90,000. The harassment stops immediately. We all walk away with something." It was a fascinating psychological tactic. He positioned himself as the reasonable peacekeeper, offering a pragmatic compromise. He attempted to frame a blatant extortion demand as a generous familial rescue. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "You want me to surrender $90,000 to a woman who just tried to publicly humiliate me in front of my medical supervisors?" David dropped the artificial paternal warmth. His jaw tightened and the strained smile vanished. He leaned closer across the small wooden table, closing the physical distance between us. The scent of his expensive generic cologne mixed with sour, nervous sweat. "Let us skip the pleasantries, Lenora. You are a registered nurse working under the jurisdiction of the Rhode Island Department of Health. Your entire livelihood depends on maintaining a spotless clinical record and a pristine ethical reputation. If you refuse this settlement, Valerie will file a formal grievance with the State Nursing Board tomorrow morning. She will submit a sworn affidavit accusing you of manipulating a medicated elderly patient for financial gain." He let the threat hang in the air, letting the gravity of the words settle. Do you know what the state board does when they receive an allegation of elder financial abuse against a licensed practitioner? He asked. They do not wait for a judge to rule. They issue an automatic administrative suspension. They revoke your clinical credentials pending a formal inquiry. You will lose your hospital badge, your income, and your professional identity before the week is over. $90,000 is a very cheap price to pay to save your entire career. He thought he played an unbeatable card. He assumed my silence indicated paralyzing fear. He believed I was calculating the destruction of my medical license, weighing it against the frozen cash. I picked up my black coffee, taking a slow, deliberate sip. The dark roast was bitter and lukewarm. I set the mug down, resting my hands near the concealed microphone embedded in my phone. Why did you forge the signature, David? The question sliced through the ambient cafe noise like a scalpel. He froze. His right hand twitched, knocking against the edge of the table. I do not know what you are talking about, he stammered, his vocal pitch rising. I kept my tone conversational and devoid of theatrical emotion. You executed the fake testament on October 14th. I hold the clinical charts from the hospice ward. Beatrice was administered a heavy dose of intravenous lorazepam at 1 o'clock. She was chemically comatose. Furthermore, I pulled the facility security logs. You were the only visitor who signed into the acute care wing during that specific window of incapacitation. You bypassed your wife, walked into a sterile room, and stamped a fraudulent legal document while my grandmother slept. The blood drained from his face, leaving his sallow skin looking gray and translucent. His breathing grew shallow. I had bypassed his elaborate extortion setup and dropped a forensic anvil onto his lap. I am curious, I pressed, maintaining the relentless clinical pressure. Valerie is screaming on the internet trying to steal a wire transfer. She is organizing hospital ambushes. She is putting on a very loud public performance. But you are the one quietly committing state felonies. Why did you take that level of personal criminal risk for a woman who treats you like an accessory? The cafe around us faded into a blur of motion and sound. David stared at me, his eyes wide and panicked. The illusion of the wealthy suburban husband shattered completely. He looked over his shoulder, checking the neighboring tables to ensure no one was eavesdropping. He leaned across the table until his face was inches from mine. Because she is a sinking ship, he hissed. His voice trembled, vibrating with raw, desperate hatred. Valerie spent the last decade burning through credit lines to maintain a lifestyle we could never afford. The cars, the vacations, the country club dues, she financed all of it on debt. When I tried to stop her, she threatened to ruin me. He dragged a shaking hand down his face, wiping away the nervous sweat. I have my own financial liabilities, Lenora. I owe a substantial amount of capital to private investors who do not utilize standard collection agencies. If I do not clear my ledger by the end of the month, I lose a lot more than my credit score. I notarized that Narragansett deed for Beatrice because she handed me $10,000 in cash. I forged the October will because I needed the liquid assets sitting in that credit union to save my own skin. The plot twisted, revealing the darkest layer of the family architecture. The primary enemy was not a unified front. The marriage was a toxic hostage situation. I am filing for divorce on Thursday, David confessed. The words rushed out of his mouth, spilling into the hidden microphone. The legal papers are already drafted and sitting in my briefcase. I am leaving her. I am shifting the bulk of the unsecured debt onto her name and walking away. But I need a parachute. He reached across the table, his shaking fingers stopping inches from my phone. I know you have the upper hand, he whispered. You have the medical charts. You own the coastal dirt. You hold all the cards. I am offering you a tactical alliance. If you guarantee me a 20% cut of the liquid cash, I will testify against Valerie in probate court. I will swear under oath that she coerced me into forging that document. I will hand you her head on a silver platter, and you keep the rest of the estate free and clear. He sat back, breathing heavily, waiting for my response. He had just delivered a comprehensive taped confession detailing bribery, forgery, and conspiracy to commit fraud. He offered to sell his own wife to a judge for a fraction of my inheritance. He operated under the pathetic delusion that I shared his transactional, parasitic worldview. I reached into my bag and retrieved my wallet. I pulled out a single, crisp $5 bill, smoothing the corners. I placed the green paper onto the center of the wooden table, directly over the hidden recording device. I stood up, pushing my chair back. The metal legs scraped against the tile floor. I looked down at the man who had just dismantled his entire life into a digital audio file. "I do not negotiate with vultures," I whispered. I turned and walked toward the glass exit doors, leaving him sitting alone in the crowded coffee shop, staring in absolute horror at the money resting on the table. The crisp autumn wind whipped off the Providence River, chilling my skin as I walked away from the coffee shop. I kept my hand inside my jacket pocket, gripping the smooth glass of my cell phone. The digital recording software continued running silently in the background, preserving the exact acoustic sequence of my uncle's self-destruction. I did not pause to look back through the plate glass windows. I navigated the busy sidewalks with the steady, measured pace of a clinician returning to the triage station with a definitive diagnosis. I rode the elevator up to Harrison Sterling's office. The administrative assistant waved me straight through the heavy oak doors. Sterling sat behind his mahogany desk, analyzing a stack of case files. I placed my phone onto the center of his blotter. I tapped the screen, ending the capture session and saving the encrypted audio file. He confessed, I stated. Sterling set his gold fountain pen down. He connected the interface cable, transferring the raw data onto his secure local server. He clicked an icon, and the high-definition playback filled the quiet room. The proprietary software functioned flawlessly. The ambient noise of the espresso grinders and the overlapping student conversations faded into a muted hum. David's frantic, whispering voice echoed clear and distinct. Sterling listened without shifting his posture. He heard the explicit admission of the $10,000 bribery regarding the Narragansett deed. He heard the detailed timeline of the October 14th forgery inside the hospice ward. He listened to the extortion attempt, leveraging my nursing license for a 20% cut of the credit union cash. The audio concluded with the revelation of the secret divorce filings hiding inside David's briefcase. Sterling paused the playback. His gray eyes reflected the glowing computer monitor. "In my 25 years of practicing probate law," he murmured, tracing the edge of his keyboard, "I have never witnessed a target construct their own gallows with such precise enthusiasm." He handed the phone back to me. "We now possess the holy trinity of civil litigation. We hold physical documentation, we hold clinical medical records, we hold a voluntary audio confession outlining multiple state felonies." I sat in the leather guest chair. "How do we execute the strike?" I asked. Sterling tented his fingers. "If we submit this evidence directly to the municipal judge this afternoon, we trigger a slow, bureaucratic machine. The court will issue warrants and schedule hearings. Valerie will receive official notice via mail granting her days to formulate a defense, or worse, destroy the interior of the Warwick property before the stop sale order physically removes her. We do not want a protracted legal siege. We want a surgical decapitation. We need to lure them into a controlled environment," I said, understanding the strategy. "We need them to sit at a table, believing they hold the winning hand." Sterling turned toward his keyboard, opening a blank, encrypted email draft. "We must offer her a victory she cannot resist," he explained. "Valerie operates on pure ego, fueled by severe financial desperation. Her hospital ambush yesterday was designed to break your professional resolve. If we signal that her intimidation tactics succeeded, she will abandon all caution and sprint toward the finish line." He began typing, his fingers moving rapidly across the keys. I watched the text appear on the screen. The message was addressed to the budget attorney Valerie hired to file the forged testament. Sterling utilized a tone of weary capitulation. He wrote that his client experienced profound professional distress following the public altercation at the medical facility. He indicated I was suffering from severe emotional fatigue and possessed zero desire to endure a lengthy public trial. The email concluded with a formal request to schedule an immediate in-person settlement conference to discuss the prompt surrender of the disputed credit union assets. "It is bait," I noted reading the draft. "It is red meat in shark-infested waters," Sterling corrected. He pressed send. Now we wait. We did not wait long. 30 minutes later, a reply chimed in the inbox. Valerie authorized her legal counsel to accept the terms immediately. She was eager to finalize the surrender before her own financial house of cards collapsed. She requested the meeting take place tomorrow morning at the law offices downtown. "No," I said, my voice hard and flat. "I dictate the location. Tell them the conference happens at the Warwick House, tomorrow at 10 in the morning. Sterling raised an eyebrow. The Warwick property is her perceived territory. She will view that concession as the ultimate submission. "That is exactly why she will agree," I replied. "She wants to sit at Beatrice's dining room table and watch me sign away my inheritance. She wants the aesthetic satisfaction of conquering the estate." Sterling drafted the counteroffer, specifying the address. The confirmation arrived moments later. The trap was officially set. I spent that evening alone in my small Providence apartment. The coastal rain began falling shortly after dusk, tapping a steady, irregular rhythm against the thin glass windows. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows across my narrow kitchen. I sat at the small laminate table, staring at the physical artifacts resting on the surface. To my left sat the heavy, iron skeleton key I extracted from the shattered ceramic mug. To my right lay the pristine ivory pages of the authentic 2018 testament I recovered from the hidden floorboards. I reached out, picking up the key. The metal felt cold, absorbing the ambient temperature of the room. I traced the rusted, jagged teeth with my thumb. My mind drifted back to the final months I spent sitting beside Beatrice in the hospice facility. I remembered the scent of the sterile bed sheets and the sound of the mechanical oxygen concentrator humming in the corner. I remembered watching her struggle to hold a simple plastic cup of water, her swollen joints trembling under the slight weight. Valerie looked at her mother and saw a fragile, decaying obstacle. She saw a vulnerable target she could manipulate and discard. My aunt believed strength was defined by volume. She thought screaming in a hospital waiting room, throwing ceramic mugs into the trash, and drafting fake cease and desist orders made her formidable. Loud people always mistake silence for weakness. They assume if you are not shouting, you are surrendering. But true endurance operates without an audience. Beatrice endured agonizing physical degradation while orchestrating a masterful structural defense. She built a blind corporate entity to protect the coastal dirt. She weaponized Valerie's own vanity, funneling decades of ground lease payments into a hidden credit union account. She embedded a skeleton key into an ugly mug, knowing her daughter valued superficial aesthetics over substance. She mapped out an invisible fortress, brick by brick, ensuring my future remained untouchable. She loved me with a quiet, ruthless precision. I placed the iron key down next to the ivory paper. I opened my leather work bag, extracting a thick presentation binder Sterling had provided. I began loading the compartments, preparing the ammunition for the morning. I inserted the Narragansett property tax receipts, proving my ownership of the land beneath Valerie's custom mansion. I slid the clinical nursing logs into the next transparent sleeve, highlighting the heavy intravenous sedative dosages administered on October 14th. I added the facility visitor records, showcasing David signing in to the isolated ward. I placed the audio transcript of the coffee shop confession, detailing the bribery and the impending divorce, into the center folder. Finally, I slipped the authentic, handwritten will into the final protective cover. I snapped the metal binder rings shut. The sound was sharp and definitive, echoing in the quiet apartment. The tension in my chest uncoiled, settling into a cold, steady focus. I was a neonatal nurse, trained to stabilize crashing systems and neutralize immediate threats. Tomorrow, I was walking into the house I inherited to confront a group of predators who believed they had cornered easy prey. Valerie thought she was arriving to collect a surrender. David thought he was maneuvering a side deal to save his own skin. Their budget attorney thought he was processing a standard capitulation. They were all walking blind into a concrete room filled with unexploded ordnance. I turned off the kitchen light, letting the apartment fall into darkness. I needed to sleep. At 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, the quiet tactical game ended and the slaughter began. Tuesday morning arrived with a sharp coastal chill, cutting through the thick gray fog rolling off the Narragansett Bay. The Warwick House stood silent, its silhouette rigid against the pale skyline. The corporate property flippers had not yet arrived. The bright yellow real estate lockbox still hung on the front door handle, an arrogant symbol of a fast cash sale that was already legally void. I unlocked the side gardening entrance using my brass key, bypassing the mechanism entirely. Mr. Sterling followed me inside, his polished leather dress shoes stepping carefully over the threshold. The interior of the house was hollow, stripped of the rugs, the framed photographs, and the ambient warmth Beatrice cultivated over 4 decades. The only piece of furniture remaining in the main living area was the large, solid oak dining table. It sat in the exact center of the room, anchoring the space like a wooden island. I took my seat on the far side of the table, resting my back against the wall. This physical positioning ensured I could observe the front hallway archway, preventing anyone from moving behind me. Sterling sat to my right, setting his thick black presentation binder squarely on the bare wood. He adjusted his silver tie, checked his heavy steel wristwatch, and folded his hands. He did not speak. We waited in the cold silence, listening to the wind rattle the loose window panes. At exactly 9:55, the sound of tires crushing the gravel driveway broke the stillness. 2 car doors slammed shut in rapid succession, followed by the heavy thud of a luxury SUV tailgate closing. Heavy footsteps echoed onto the front wooden porch. Mallory did not bother to knock. She pushed the heavy oak door open, striding into the hallway with the aggressive momentum of a conquering general. She wore a tailored crimson blazer over a black silk blouse, projecting dominant aesthetic power. Her husband David trailed closely behind her, wearing his standard pastel polo shirt hidden beneath a gray raincoat. His eyes immediately darted toward me, searching for any physical sign that I intended to honor our secret coffee shop alliance. Following David was my cousin Tyler, his posture slouched, holding his smartphone and glaring at the floorboards. Bringing up the rear was a man clutching a battered faux leather briefcase. He wore a cheap, ill-fitting suit that bunched at the shoulders. This was the budget attorney Valerie hired to file the forged testament. Valerie stopped at the edge of the dining room, her crimson blazer contrasting sharply with the pale, empty walls. She surveyed the room, absorbing the distinct lack of moving boxes or defensive legal paperwork on our side of the table. A triumphant smile curled the corner of her mouth. She believed the barren environment signaled my total collapse. She thought I was sitting in the empty shell of a house I failed to protect, waiting to sign the terms of my own surrender. She walked to the head of the oak table, pulling out the heavy wooden chair. She did not sit down immediately. She opened her designer handbag, extracting a thick manila folder and dropping it onto the center of the table with a loud, theatrical slap. "Let us make this efficient, Lenora," she announced, her voice echoing against the bare plaster. My attorney drafted the waiver overnight. It releases the frozen credit union funds into my primary checking account and formally waives any future claims you might attempt against this physical property. You sign the bottom line today, and the hospital harassment ceases. You refuse, and I promise you will spend the next 5 years drowning in municipal court fees while I dismantle your medical license piece by piece. She tapped a manicured fingernail against the cover of the folder. Sign the paper and walk out the door. We have demolition crews arriving in 3 hours to gut this place. I did not reach for her folder. I did not look at her attorney, who was busy snapping his briefcase open and shuffling loose, unorganized documents. I kept my focus entirely on Valerie, analyzing the frantic pulse vibrating at the base of her throat. She was projecting aristocratic dominance, but the physical tells remained. The high-stakes bravado masked a desperate, starving animal trapped in a corner. Before Mr. Sterling utters a single syllable, "I have a personal matter to address," I said. My voice was low, even, and devoid of the emotional static she expected. I reached into my scrub jacket pocket. I pulled out a small black velvet pouch. I opened the drawstring and tipped the contents onto the bare oak table. The vintage pearl necklace Beatrice gave me on my 16th birthday slid out, resting coiled and luminous against the dark wood. Valerie stared at the jewelry. The triumphant smile vanished, replaced by a sharp, aggressive confusion. She looked down at the pearls, then back up at my face. Her eyes narrowed, calculating the impossibility of the object resting in front of her. "I took those from you 3 days ago," she stated, her tone defensive and tight. "I packed them in my tote bag. They are sitting inside my personal safe at home. I am the executor. Those belong to the estate." I pushed the pearls across the smooth table, sliding them until they stopped inches from her manicured hand. "You took a replica, Valerie," I replied, the clinical detachment in my voice acting as a steady scalpel against her rising panic. "You walked into this house on the day of the funeral, tearing through the rooms like a looter looking for quick cash. You demanded the pearls right off my neck. I handed them over because I recognized you were experiencing a catastrophic financial failure and needed an immediate tactile victory. But I am not an idiot. I swapped the genuine vintage strand for a $50 thrift store imitation 3 years ago. I kept the real pearls locked in a secure deposit box in Providence. You spent the last 72 hours guarding fake plastic beads inside your expensive home safe." Tyler snickered, a short, abrupt sound of genuine amusement erupting from his slouched posture near the doorway. Valerie shot him a look of absolute venom, silencing him instantly. She snatched the genuine pearls off the table, clutching them in her fist. "It does not matter," she hissed, her face flushing a deep, angry red. "Real or fake, I am the executor of this testament. I claim them all. Now sign the financial waiver." She shoved the manila folder closer to my side of the table. Mr. Sterling finally moved. He did not yell. He did not engage in the theatrical posturing Valerie utilized. He simply reached out and placed his hand flat on top of her manila folder, stopping its momentum. He slid it back across the table, pushing it off the edge, where it fell onto the floorboards with a dull thud. "Ms. Hill will not be signing any waivers today," he stated. His baritone voice filled the empty room, commanding total acoustic authority. "Furthermore, your timeline regarding the demolition crews is severely flawed." Valerie's budget attorney cleared his throat, stepping forward to justify his retainer fee. "Now see here," he stammered, gesturing with a cheap plastic pen. "My client holds the validated 2023 last will and testament. The court granted her preliminary executor status. She maintains the legal authority to liquidate this physical property. We executed a fast cash contract yesterday afternoon. The sale is binding." Sterling opened his heavy black presentation binder. He flipped past the initial transparent sleeves, locating a specific document stamped with red municipal ink. He extracted the paper, laying it flat on the center of the oak table, directly in front of the opposing attorney. "That is an emergency judicial stop sale order executed by the county clerk at 8 o'clock this morning," Sterling explained. "It formally blocks the transfer of the Warwick deed and invalidates your fast cash contract entirely. Any demolition crew attempting to breach the perimeter of this structure will face immediate arrest for felony trespassing." The budget attorney frowned, picking up the document and pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. He scanned the legal phrasing, reading the municipal codes. His brow furrowed in genuine confusion. He looked at Sterling, then down at the paper again. On what legal grounds did a judge grant an emergency barricade against a validated executor? He asked, his professional bravado leaking away. "You cannot file a stop sale without presenting a superior, contradictory claim to the title." Sterling turned the page in his binder. He pulled out the pristine ivory document I recovered from the hidden basement floorboards. He placed it next to the stop sale order, ensuring the jagged, erratic cursive signature was clearly visible under the harsh morning light. "We secured the injunction because your client submitted a fraudulent application to the probate court," Sterling replied, his voice cold and precise. "We presented the authentic handwritten testament, drafted and notarized in 2018. This document explicitly grants the entirety of the Warwick physical estate to Lenora Hill. Valerie lunged forward, gripping the edge of the table. "That is a lie," she screamed, the polished veneer shattering completely. "That document is 5 years old. It is an outdated draft. I hold the finalized paperwork from October. My paperwork supersedes that obsolete garbage." She turned to her lawyer, her eyes wide and frantic. "Tell them," she yelled. "Explain the revocation clause. Tell them my document holds the final legal authority." The opposing attorney did not look at Valerie. He kept his eyes locked on the authentic ivory paper resting on the oak table. He noticed the jagged, erratic signature. He noticed the proper legal formatting indicating a genuine estate attorney drafted the original framework. He recognized the structural integrity of the threat sitting in front of him. He looked up at Sterling, recognizing a predator sitting across the table. "If you are challenging the validity of the October Testament based on a chronological discrepancy," he began cautiously, "we will simply request a formal judicial review. We possess a certified, notarized signature on our document. The court will presume our version is authentic unless you provide irrefutable forensic evidence of a forgery. That takes months of litigation." Sterling smiled, the same tight, predatory expression I witnessed in his office. "We are not relying on a chronological discrepancy," Counselor Sterling stated quietly, "and we certainly are not waiting months for a forensic handwriting analysis. We are relying on basic human biology." He turned to the next section of the presentation binder, preparing to drop the pharmaceutical anvil onto the center of the table. The tactical skirmish over the physical property was finished. The surgical dismantling of the forged legal defense was about to begin. Sterling slowly turned the heavy pages of his presentation binder. The sharp, crisp sound of the plastic sleeves shifting echoed across the bare oak table. Valerie's budget attorney leaned forward slightly, his cheap suit straining at the shoulders, anticipating the forensic ambush. Valerie remained locked in a posture of aggressive denial, her jaw tight, her fingers still clutching the genuine pearls she had snatched from the wood surface moments prior. She believed the volume of her rage could override the legal structure assembling against her. "If you attempt to bring an outdated 5-year-old document into a modern probate hearing, you will be laughed out of the courtroom," Valerie stated, her voice brittle and sharp. "My paperwork is current. My paperwork holds a certified notary seal. You have nothing but a rusty old draft." Sterling ignored her. He extracted a thick stack of medical charts from the binder, placing them directly next to the authentic ivory testament. The pages were dense with clinical terminology, numeric medication codes, and bright yellow highlighter marks. Counselor Sterling began addressing the opposing attorney directly, bypassing Valerie entirely. "Your client submitted a document claiming Beatrice Hill executed her final wishes on October 14th of last year. I assume you reviewed the document before filing the emergency petition?" The budget attorney nodded warily. "I reviewed the signature and the notary seal. Everything appeared structurally sound." Sterling tapped the highlighted section of the clinical logs. "These are the certified medical records subpoenaed from the acute care hospice facility. I draw your attention to the specific pharmaceutical administration log for October 14th. At exactly 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the attending physician ordered a heavy intravenous dose of lorazepam to manage a sudden, severe panic attack." He slid the chart across the table. The opposing attorney picked it up, adjusting his glasses to read the microscopic clinical text. "The dosage administered was chemically paralyzing." Sterling continued his baritone voice, relentless and precise. "According to the nursing notes, Beatrice was profoundly lethargic and unresponsive to verbal stimuli by 2:30. It is a biological impossibility for a patient under that level of heavy chemical sedation to possess the necessary cognitive awareness, fine motor skills, or legal capacity to execute a binding testament. Your client submitted a document bearing a pristine, perfect cursive signature, supposedly generated by an unconscious woman suffering from severe rheumatoid arthritis." The budget attorney lowered the medical chart. The color drained from his face, leaving a pale, sickly sheen. He was a low-tier litigator, accustomed to handling simple, uncontested estates. He was not equipped to navigate felony fraud allegations involving falsified medical timelines. He looked at Valerie, a stark realization dawning in his eyes. "You told me she was lucid," he whispered. "You explicitly promised me she signed this paperwork during a period of cognitive clarity." Valerie slammed her hand flat against the table. "I did not lie to you," she screamed, pivoting to face her lawyer. "She was fine. They are manipulating the medical charts. They are nurses. They know how to fake pharmaceutical logs. This is a coordinated smear campaign." Sterling did not raise his voice to match her hysteria. He simply turned the page in his binder, extracting the facility visitor records. He laid the security log flat on the table. If Ms. Hill was faking the medical charts, she certainly executed a brilliant operational timeline, Sterling noted dryly, because the facility security logs perfectly corroborate the clinical narrative. He pointed to the single signature registered on the afternoon of October 14th. Valerie restricted all family access to the acute care wing during this period, claiming doctors' orders required absolute isolation. Yet the security logs show one individual bypassed the restriction and signed into the restricted ward at 1:45 in the afternoon, right as the chemical sedation reached peak efficacy. The budget attorney leaned over the table reading the handwritten name on the visitor log. He froze. He slowly turned his head, looking past Valerie, fixing his gaze on David, who was standing silently near the hallway archway. David Mitchell signed into the room. The lawyer read aloud, his voice tight with rising panic. Valerie stopped breathing. The frantic pulse at the base of her throat ceased its erratic fluttering. She turned her head, slowly tracking the lawyer's gaze until her eyes locked onto her husband. The aggressive, aristocratic mask she wore fractured, exposing genuine, profound confusion. "David, what is he talking about?" she asked, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Why were you at the hospice facility? You told me you were at the commercial office that afternoon." David shrank back against the plaster wall. His pastel polo shirt seemed to swallow his posture. He opened his mouth, attempting to formulate a lie, but his jaw worked silently, producing no sound. The artificial paternal warmth he projected at the coffee shop yesterday was gone, replaced by the naked terror of a cornered animal. He was there because the timeline required a physical intruder. Sterling answered for him. "Your husband bypassed the reception desk while Beatrice was unconscious. He secured the fraudulent signature and stamped the paperwork using an anonymous rotary seal to hide his involvement from you and the courts." "That is absurd," Valerie shouted, her panic violently reigniting. "David does not know the first thing about estate law. Why would he forge a testament behind my back? He gains nothing by executing an anonymous fraud." This was the exact moment the tactical geometry of the room shifted. Up until this second, Valerie believed she was fighting a two-front war against me and my attorney. She thought she was defending a unified marriage against external sabotage. She possessed no concept of the profound betrayal festering inside her own home. The audience knew what resided inside the digital encrypted file waiting on the table, but Valerie remained entirely clueless, navigating a battlefield where the landmines were planted by her own partner. I reached into my bag and retrieved my cell phone, placing it flat on the bare oak wood. "He did not forge the document to protect your lifestyle, Valerie," I said, maintaining a cold, steady eye contact. "He forged it because he needed the liquid cash to save his own life." I tapped the screen, activating the audio playback. The high-definition recording filled the empty dining room. The acoustic filtering removed the ambient cafe noise, isolating David's frantic, desperate, whispering voice with crystal clarity. The sound bounced off the plaster walls, sharp and undeniable. The recording played the explicit admission of the $10,000 bribery regarding the Narragansett corporate deed transfer. It played the detailed explanation of the October 14th forgery inside the hospice ward, orchestrated to bypass Valerie and hijack the credit union funds. It played the extortion attempt, leveraging my medical license. But the most devastating acoustic strike landed when David's voice outlined his primary motivation. "Because she is a sinking ship," the recorded voice hissed, vibrating with raw hatred. Valerie spent the last decade burning through credit lines to maintain a lifestyle we could never afford. When I tried to stop her, she threatened to ruin me. I have my own financial liabilities. I owe a substantial amount of capital to private investors who do not utilize standard collection agencies. If I do not clear my ledger by the end of the month, I lose a lot more than my credit score. The audio concluded, leaving a suffocating, heavy silence in its wake. Valerie stood perfectly still. The designer crimson blazer seemed to hang loosely on her frame. The absolute betrayal carved deep lines into her face, aging her 10 years in 10 seconds. She did not scream. She did not launch a theatrical counterattack. She simply stared at the man she had been married to for 30 years, recognizing a stranger standing in his clothes. She realized the entire foundation of her legal assault, her social media smear campaign, and her arrogant hostility was built over a sinkhole dug by her own husband. Tyler pushed himself off the wall near the archway. The slouched, apathetic posture vanished, replaced by a physical revulsion. He looked at his father, his face contorted in disgust. "You sold us out to pay bookies?" Tyler spat the words, hitting the quiet room like physical blows. "You let Mom scream on the internet and fight the courts while you planned to steal the cash and run." David raised his hands, palms facing outward, attempting a weak, defensive gesture. "Tyler, listen to me," he stammered, his voice cracking. "You do not understand the pressure I was under. The debt was unmanageable. I was trying to protect the family from the fallout." Tyler shook his head, turning his back on his father and walking out the front door. The heavy oak frame slammed shut, vibrating the floorboards. The budget attorney moved with sudden, frantic energy. He did not ask questions. He did not attempt to negotiate a settlement. He grabbed his scattered, unorganized paperwork, shoving the files indiscriminately into his faux leather briefcase. He snapped the cheap brass latches shut, pulling the handle with violent force. He stood up, looking directly at Valerie, his expression radiating professional terror. "I am withdrawing my representation immediately," he announced, his voice shaking. "You presented fraudulent documentation to my office. You suborned perjury. I have a sworn ethical obligation to notify the probate judge that the petition I filed on your behalf is built on active felony conspiracy. Do not contact my firm again." He did not wait for a response. He practically sprinted out of the dining room, his cheap suit bunching at the shoulders, desperate to escape the blast radius of the impending criminal indictments. Valerie stood utterly defenseless. Her legal counsel abandoned her. Her son walked out. Her husband stood exposed as a traitor and a felon. The fake testament was legally destroyed. The emergency stop sale order blocked her from liquidating the physical property. The aggressive fortress she constructed over the past 72 hours collapsed, leaving her standing in the rubble. But the surgical dismantling was not complete. I still held the final envelope recovered from the hidden cedar cavity. The clinical evidence destroyed her legal defense, but the handwritten letter waiting inside my presentation binder was designed to destroy the illusion she held of her own mother. The sharp click of the front door latch echoed through the empty dining room, marking the sudden departure of my cousin and the budget attorney. The silence that rushed in to fill the space was heavy, pressing down on the bare plaster walls. Valerie stood paralyzed at the head of the oak table. Her chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow movements. The tailored crimson blazer lost its sharp structural edges, mirroring the rapid collapse of her internal defenses. She turned her head toward the hallway archway, seeking the only remaining familiar figure in the room. David remained pressed against the plaster wall. His eyes darted toward the exit, calculating his own physical escape route. Valerie took a hesitant step toward him, raising a trembling hand. "David," she whispered, her voice fragile and hollow, "tell me this is a misunderstanding. Tell me you did not forge that document behind my back. Tell me you did not say those things on that recording." David looked at the floorboards, refusing to meet her gaze. He shifted his weight, inching away from her outstretched fingers. "Valerie, I had no choice," he muttered. "The creditors were threatening my physical safety. They were going to hurt me. I needed a way out." He was still lying. He was still attempting to frame his profound betrayal as an unavoidable tragedy rather than a calculated extortion plot. He intended to abandon her to the legal wolves while he fled with a portion of the estate cash. I reached into the final compartment of my leather work bag. "You do not need to ask him for explanations, Valerie," I said, drawing her attention back to the oak surface. He already provided his exit strategy to the municipal clerk this morning. I extracted a thick, stapled legal packet, holding it by the corner. Sterling accessed the county domestic relations portal an hour before we arrived. He intercepted the digital filing David submitted right as the courthouse opened. I slid the document across the smooth wood. It traveled the length of the table, stopping directly in front of Valerie. The top page featured the official seal of the Rhode Island family court system. "Those are the formal dissolution of marriage filings," I explained, my tone maintaining a steady clinical rhythm. He drafted them weeks ago, holding them in his briefcase while he played the supportive husband. If you read the asset division proposals on page 4, you will notice he engineered the financial separation to burden you with the entirety of the unsecured marital debt. He legally transferred the offshore gambling liabilities, the maxed-out credit cards, and the impending foreclosure of your coastal mansion onto your name. He planned to walk away clean, leaving you to face bankruptcy and criminal fraud indictments alone. Valerie stared down at the black ink. Her trembling fingers traced the stylized font of her own name listed as the defendant. The realization struck her with physical force. Her knees buckled slightly, forcing her to grip the edge of the table to remain standing. She looked at David, her expression shifting from profound betrayal to a vacant, hollow shock. The man she spent 3 decades building a pristine suburban facade with had just detonated their shared life to save himself. David finally pushed off the wall. He did not look at his wife. He kept his gaze fixed on the front door, adjusting the collar of his gray raincoat. "I am leaving," he announced, his voice devoid of any remaining artificial warmth. "There is nothing left here for me." He turned and walked down the hallway, his footsteps hurried and ungraceful. The front door opened and closed. Another vehicle engine started outside, tires spinning on the damp gravel. Valerie stood alone at the head of the table, surrounded by the wreckage of her marriage, her finances, and her social standing. The surgical dismantling was nearly finished. The legal and financial structures were neutralized. But a lingering infection remained. Valerie still believed her mother was a naive, fragile victim. She still operated under the delusion that Beatrice was an oblivious target who simply got lucky because I intervened. I needed to correct that historical error. I needed to deliver the final prescription. I opened the metal rings of the presentation binder. Resting inside the final protective sleeve was the yellowed envelope I extracted from the hidden cedar cavity in the basement. I pulled it out, holding the worn paper under the harsh morning light. "The clinical evidence destroyed your fraudulent defense," I said, my voice dropping to a quiet, resonant register. "The audio recording exposed your husband's treason. But this artifact was waiting for you long before I stepped into this room." Valerie slowly lifted her head. Her eyes lacked focus, tracking the envelope without comprehension. I broke the brittle seal, sliding the folded ivory parchment free. The jagged, erratic handwriting filled the page, ink pressing deep into the paper. Beatrice drafted this letter on the same day she finalized the authentic 2018 testament. She sealed it and hid it beneath the floorboards, knowing exactly how this final confrontation would unfold. I smoothed the crease and began to read aloud. "To my daughter Valerie, if Lenora is reading this letter to you, it means my physical body has failed and my predictions regarding your greed proved accurate. I watched you operate for 30 years. I watched you prioritize pristine appearances over genuine connection. I watched you drown in debt to impress neighbors who do not care about you. I always knew you would view my passing not as a tragedy, but as a financial opportunity." Valerie flinched as her mother's voice channeled through my words, filling the empty space. You believed my arthritis made me weak, the letter continued. You assumed my quiet demeanor meant I was oblivious to the corporate ground lease funding your oceanfront lifestyle. You thought the monthly payments disappeared into a faceless trust. You never realized I owned the coastal dirt holding up your swimming pool. I structured that blind corporation to protect Lenora, ensuring my quiet granddaughter held the ultimate leverage over your endless vanity. I paused, letting the revelation settle into the room. Valerie stared at the wood, her breath hitching in her throat. She had spent 2 decades bragging about a luxury estate built on soil her mother secretly controlled. I read the final paragraph, pacing the words deliberately. I knew you would arrive at my funeral demanding immediate treasures. I knew you would loot my home, searching for quick, liquid assets to plug the holes in your sinking ship. I engineered this house to feed your superficial hunger. I bought cheap replica pearls and displayed them on my dresser. I polished the heavy silver spoons and left them accessible on the dining room cabinet. I let you take the silverware, Valerie, because I needed you distracted while I secured the vault. I needed you carrying heavy, useless metal out the front door so Lenora could secure the foundation of her future. You underestimated both of us. That was your fatal error. I folded the ivory parchment, sliding it back into the yellowed envelope. I placed it gently onto the oak surface. Valerie crumpled into the heavy wooden chair. She wrapped her arms around her stomach, bending forward as a ragged, dry sob tore through her chest. The sound was wretched, stripped of all theatrical performance. It was the sound of a woman realizing she had spent her entire adult life playing a game on a board her mother designed, owned, and controlled. She had been outsmarted, outmaneuvered, and defeated by an elderly woman she dismissed as helpless. Harrison Sterling stood up, buttoning his tailored charcoal suit jacket. He gathered his documents, placing them methodically into his leather briefcase. He did not spare Valerie a single glance of pity. This concludes the civil portion of our morning, Ms. Mitchell, the attorney announced, his baritone tone echoing with finality. I am formally notifying you that my office contacted Adult Protective Services and the Providence District Attorney 1 hour ago. We transmitted the clinical hospice logs, the facility security records, and the digital audio confession directly to their fraud division. Criminal indictments regarding forgery, elder financial abuse, and conspiracy are currently being drafted. Sterling snapped his briefcase latches shut. The sharp metallic clicks sounded like a judge striking a gavel. Furthermore, he added, you possess 24 hours to return every single physical heirloom you removed from this property, including the replica pearls and the silver spoons. If those items are not resting on this table by tomorrow morning, we will add felony grand larceny to your impending charge sheet. Do not contact my client again. I picked up my leather work bag, slipping the strap over my shoulder. I looked at the woman weeping at the head of the table. The crimson blazer was wrinkled, her designer makeup smeared across her hands. She was a hollow shell sitting in an empty room, waiting for the authorities to arrive. I did not offer a comforting platitude. I did not demand an apology. In the medical field, when a necrotic tumor is successfully excised, you do not converse with the infected tissue. You suture the healthy skin, close the wound, and walk away. I turned my back on my aunt walking down the narrow hallway and out the front door. Mr. Sterling followed me, securing the heavy oak frame behind us. The lock clicked into place, echoing across the damp coastal morning. I stepped off the wooden porch, walking across the gravel driveway toward my car. I did not look back. I did not need to. The Warwick estate was finally quiet, safe, and entirely mine. 2 months passed since the heavy oak door clicked shut behind my aunt, leaving her weeping in the empty dining room. The Rhode Island autumn faded into a bitter gray winter, carrying freezing rain off the Atlantic Ocean. While the coastal weather turned harsh, the legal machinery initiated by Harrison Sterling operated with a cold, surgical warmth. The fallout did not occur in a dramatic televised courtroom spectacle. True justice rarely operates under studio lighting. It functions through dense paperwork, certified mail, and the slow, crushing weight of municipal bureaucracy. The Providence District Attorney reviewed the clinical hospice logs, the facility's security records, and the high-definition audio confession. They did not offer leniency or negotiated plea deals. The evidence was too pristine to ignore. Warrants were issued during the first week of November. David was apprehended by state police at a budget motel near the regional airport, attempting to secure a one-way commercial flight to a jurisdiction lacking extradition treaties. He faced multiple felony indictments for forgery, conspiracy, and attempted extortion. His offshore creditors realized his financial accounts were frozen by the state and abandoned their pursuit, realizing he possessed zero liquid capital to extract. Valerie fared no better against the criminal justice system. The state indicted her for elder financial exploitation and conspiracy to commit fraud. Her budget attorney fulfilled his promise, cooperating fully with the prosecutors to shield his own firm from ethical blowback. But the criminal charges were merely the opening sequence of her systemic ruin. The most devastating strike originated from the blind corporate entity Beatrice built decades ago. Because my limited liability company held the physical title to the Narragansett dirt beneath Valerie's custom-built mansion, I instructed Sterling to activate the punitive clauses buried deep inside her 99-year ground lease. The contract contains strict morality and financial compliance stipulations. By orchestrating a felony fraud attempt against the principal landowner, Valerie and David breached the foundational terms of their own residency. Sterling filed the corporate eviction notices. The foreclosure process was swift and legally unassailable. Valerie lost the architectural foundation of her entire social identity. The luxury vehicles were repossessed by the leasing agencies. The custom swimming pool overlooking the ocean was drained. A regional banking trust seized the physical structure of the McMansion to satisfy the mountain of unsecured debt David abandoned. Valerie was forced to pack her remaining inexpensive belongings into cardboard boxes and vacate the premises under the supervision of county sheriffs. The social consequences mirrored her financial collapse. The Facebook group chat she created to orchestrate my public smearing went entirely dormant. The uncles and second cousins from the West Coast who eagerly labeled me a predator abruptly deleted their digital comments. They did not call to apologize for their participation in the digital mob. They simply retreated into embarrassed silence, recognizing they had publicly aligned themselves with a documented felon. The country club revoked her membership. Her wealthy suburban social circle evaporated overnight, treating her presence like an infectious disease. Stripped of her assets, her husband, and her pristine public facade, Valerie faced a harsh economic reality. She required an immediate income source to fund her basic living expenses and secure a low-tier defense attorney. Lacking a college degree or any marketable corporate skills, she plummeted to the bottom of the employment hierarchy. In late November, the probate judge officially unfroze the credit union routing numbers. $180,000 transferred securely into my primary financial registry. I withdrew a specific portion of those funds, securing a certified bank draft. I intended to deliver a charitable donation to the medical staff who provided genuine comfort to Beatrice during her final days. I drove to the acute care hospice facility, navigating the familiar asphalt parking lot. I walked through the automatic sliding glass doors, stepping into the sterile, climate-controlled lobby. The air smelled of institutional bleach and artificial floral air freshener. I approached the curved laminate reception desk to request the administrative director. Sitting behind the tall counter, staring blankly at a glowing computer monitor, was Valerie. She wore a stiff maroon polyester uniform issued by the facility. A cheap plastic name tag rested crookedly on her lapel. Her designer makeup was gone, replaced by the pale, exhausted skin of a woman working hourly shifts to survive. She was tasked with answering the incoming phone lines and managing the digital visitor logs. It was the exact same registry system her husband manipulated to forge the October Testament. The universe possesses a flawless sense of poetic rhythm. Valerie treated her mother like a disposable burden, dumping Beatrice into this fluorescent purgatory because caring for an aging parent interfered with her luxury lifestyle. Now, stripped of her wealth and her arrogance, Valerie was permanently trapped inside the very same building. She was forced to earn minimum wage, serving the medical infrastructure she once tried to manipulate. She looked up, hearing my footsteps against the linoleum. Her eyes widened, locking onto my face. She did not scream. She did not launch into a theatrical defense. The combative energy that fueled her hospital ambush was extinguished. She looked down at the keyboard, her shoulders slumped in total defeat. I did not offer a polite greeting. I did not gloat. I slid the certified bank draft across the laminate counter, pushing it until it rested near her keyboard. "This is a donation for the palliative care nursing staff," I stated my voice, maintaining the quiet, professional register I utilized in the neonatal ward. "Please ensure the administrative director receives it." I turned and walked out of the facility, leaving her sitting in the artificial light, processing the paperwork of a life she could no longer afford to live. I spent the remainder of the winter focusing on the restoration of the Warwick estate. I utilized the credit union funds to hire specialized local contractors. We stabilized the physical foundation of the property, reinforcing the basement supports. We sanded the vintage oak floorboards, erasing the deep scuffs left by my aunt's designer heels. We applied fresh coats of pale paint to the plaster walls, removing the lingering shadows of the November funeral. The house slowly began to breathe again. I moved my belongings out of my cramped Providence apartment and took up permanent residence. I arranged my medical textbooks in the front reading room. I filled the kitchen with the scent of roasted coffee and fresh coastal air. I retrieved the shattered pieces of the green ceramic mug from a storage box. I did not throw the fragments away. Instead, I purchased a specialized gold epoxy resin, utilizing a traditional repair technique called kintsugi. I spent 3 evenings carefully gluing the thick shards back together. The bright gold veins traced the fault lines, highlighting the precise spots where the structural damage occurred. It no longer held liquid, but it sat proudly on the granite kitchen island, serving as a physical reminder that broken things can be reassembled into stronger, resilient armor. On a quiet Sunday morning in early December, I brewed a pot of dark roast coffee. I poured a fresh cup and unlocked the back door, stepping out onto the wooden porch. The Rhode Island winter wind was sharp, carrying the heavy scent of sea salt and freezing rain off the Atlantic Bay. I stood against the wooden railing, looking out over the frosted grass. I wore the genuine vintage pearl necklace, resting cool and heavy against my collarbone. The physical weight of the pearls provided a steady, grounding sensation. I closed my eyes, letting the cold wind rush past my face. People often confuse volume with strength. They believe the loudest person in the room holds the most authority. They assume threats and public displays of anger dictate the outcome of a conflict. Valerie lived her entire life subscribing to that chaotic philosophy. She destroyed her own foundation trying to prove she was the most formidable force in the family. But Beatrice understood the architecture of true endurance. My grandmother knew that authentic power operates in the quiet spaces. It does not require an audience. It does not demand immediate recognition or praise. True love does not orchestrate theatrical performances. True love watches the horizon, anticipating the arrival of the wolves. It quietly secures the coastal dirt it hides the iron keys in plain sight. And it meticulously plans for your survival long after it is gone. Beatrice fought a silent, grueling war from a hospice bed, enduring physical agony to ensure I would never have to surrender my future to a predator. I took a slow sip of my coffee, watching the morning light pierce through the gray coastal fog. I was a neonatal nurse. I spent my life monitoring fragile heartbeats and stabilizing crashing systems. But Beatrice was the master architect. She designed an invisible fortress and handed me the blueprints, just as the walls began to shake. I simply followed the chart. If you are listening to this and you have someone in your life who protects you quietly, who anticipates the storms before the clouds even gather, recognize their work. Do not mistake their silence for absence. Sometimes the most profound armor is forged by the people who never raise their voice. That is my story. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. If you believe in the power of quiet strategy and the undeniable force of poetic justice, hit that like button. If you have ever dismantled a toxic relative by simply letting them talk themselves into a corner, subscribe to the channel. Share your own stories of silent protectors in the comments below. I read every single one. Welcome to the Olivia Stories Revenge community. I will see you in the next one. The green ceramic mug sits on my kitchen island, its fault lines traced in bright gold resin. Every morning, as I pour my coffee, I look at those illuminated cracks and think about the architecture of a family. We are told from a young age that family is an unbreakable bond, a biological safety net that catches us when the world tilts. But the reality of American family life is often far more complicated. Sometimes the hands meant to catch us are the ones pushing us toward the edge. Looking back at the cold, quiet war my grandmother waged to protect me, I realize her strategy was not just a masterclass in estate planning. It was a profound final lesson in parenting responsibility and the true cost of raising children. In our culture, it is easy to confuse provision with parenting. We see the sprawling coastal homes, the luxury vehicles in the driveway, and the pristine holiday cards, and we equate these physical markers with success. My Aunt Valerie built her existence on that illusion. She and David raised their son Tyler inside a fortress of debt, teaching him prestige was more valuable than principle. They modeled a life where appearances excused a lack of moral foundation. When financial pressure mounted, their strategy collapsed. David abandoned his son to save himself, and Tyler learned that loyalty in his household was entirely transactional. True parenting demands something much harder than buying a custom swimming pool on leased dirt. It requires the emotional awareness to look at your own children and see them exactly as they are, without the filter of unconditional excuse. Beatrice loved Valerie. She was her mother. But Beatrice possessed the rare, painful courage to acknowledge that her daughter had grown into a predator. She recognized that Valerie's hunger for status had eclipsed her capacity for honesty and fairness. It is a terrifying realization for any parent to understand that the child you raised might be the very threat the rest of your family needs protection from. Most people look away. They write another check, they make another excuse, and they allow the toxic cycle to infect the next generation. They mistake enablement for love. Beatrice refused to look away. She understood that her final act of motherhood was not to coddle Valerie's greed, but to establish an ironclad boundary against it. She taught me that long-term guidance does not always come in the form of gentle advice or warm hugs. Sometimes guidance is a hidden property deed. Sometimes it is the deliberate choice to let a toxic relative carry away heavy, worthless silver spoons so the real foundation remains undisturbed. Beatrice demonstrated that genuine family responsibility means safeguarding the vulnerable, even if it requires outmaneuvering your own flesh and blood. This story is not just about a stolen inheritance or a secret bank account. It is about emotional regulation and the generational transfer of character. In the neonatal intensive care unit, I learned that panic is a useless currency. When the alarms sound, you do not scream. You breathe, you assess the chart, and you stabilize the patient. Beatrice instilled that clinical calm in me long before I ever put on a pair of scrubs. She taught me that the loudest person in the room is rarely the strongest. We live in a society that often rewards the loud, the demanding, and the performative. But the people who truly sustain our communities, the steady parents, the honest workers, the quiet protectors, operate under a different set of rules. They do not demand applause. They pay the taxes on the hidden acreage. They save the skeleton keys. They build structures that will outlast them, ensuring their children have solid ground to stand on when the inevitable storms arrive. Raising children with a strong moral compass requires a commitment to fairness that transcends biological favoritism. It means teaching them that actions carry unavoidable consequences. Valerie never learned that lesson until the morning the probate judge voided her forged testament and the sheriffs arrived at her door. She was shielded from accountability for decades, and that insulation ultimately orchestrated her ruin. If we want to raise resilient, honorable individuals, we must allow them to experience the weight of their own choices. We must teach them that integrity is not a luxury item you can finance. It is the only asset that holds its value when the bank accounts freeze. These are the quiet, difficult truths that resonate behind closed doors in neighborhoods across the country. Every family holds its own secrets, its own hidden ledgers, and its own cracked ceramics waiting to be repaired. If this reflection echoes something you have experienced in your own life, if you recognize the difference between the loud demands of entitlement and the quiet architecture of true love, please take a moment to subscribe to Olivia Stories Revenge. We explore the complex, often hidden dynamics of family survival, bringing you narratives that validate the quiet strength it takes to hold your ground. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a lesson in resilience, and share your own thoughts in the comments below. We are building a community that honors the truth over the facade. As I stand on the back porch of the Warwick house listening to the coastal wind rustle the old oak trees, I cannot help but think about the invisible lines connecting generations. We inherit more than physical real estate and vintage pearls. We inherit the consequences of our parents' choices, and we pass our own choices down to the children watching from the doorway. The next time you sit at a holiday dinner table surrounded by the familiar faces of your relatives, take a quiet moment to observe the room. Listen to the conversations echoing over the clinking silverware. Look at the smiles, the posturing, and the carefully curated stories being shared across the table. Ask yourself, what foundation is holding up the chairs you are sitting on? Is it built on the solid bedrock of honesty, fairness, and mutual respect? Or is it resting on a leased illusion, waiting for a single gust of truth to blow the entire house down? The answer is always there, hidden in plain sight, just waiting for someone brave enough to look at the chart.